The blizzard came with a vengeance, swallowing the Wyoming prairie in white. Victoria Sullivan fought against the howling wind, pulling her woolen shawl tighter as she trudged through knee-deep snow toward the barn. The animals needed checking, and with nightfall approaching fast, she couldn't wait till morning. The harsh winter of 1885 had already claimed enough lives in these parts. Tori, as most called her, paused to catch her breath. The small farmhouse behind her glowed with the warm light of oil lamps, a beacon in the growing darkness. Inside, her 9-year-old son Benjamin slept, watched over by Iris, her mother-in-law. For a moment, Tori considered turning back, but responsibility pushed her forward. The livestock was all they had left. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A thud, followed by something like a groan. Human, not animal. Tori's spine stiffened. 2 years as a widow had taught her caution. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and visitors didn't come in blizzards. She retreated to the house, slipping through the side door into the kitchen. Her late husband's rifle hung above the stone fireplace. Tori took it down with practiced hands, checking the chamber as Caleb had taught her. Loaded. She grabbed extra shells from the drawer, stuffing them into her pocket before heading back out. The sound came again, clearer now, a scraping against the barn door. Tori approached silently, rifle raised. Through the curtain of snow, she made out a tall figure struggling with the latch. A horse thief, perhaps. Or worse. "Step away," she called, voice steady, despite her pounding heart. "I've got a rifle trained on you." The figure turned slowly. A man, broad-shouldered and tall, his face obscured by a snow-crusted hat. But what caught Tori's attention was the dark stain spreading across his chest, black against his light coat in the fading light. He swayed, one hand braced against the barn door. "Please," he whispered the word, barely audible above the wind. "Don't let me die, like he did." The words struck Tori like physical blows. Those same words, Caleb's final plea as he bled out in her arms 2 years ago. The rifle wavered in her hands. The stranger's knees buckled. He crumpled into the snow, a dark heap against pristine white. Tori stood frozen, the rifle still aimed, her mind racing. It could be a trick. It could be dangerous. It could be... A soft moan broke her paralysis. She moved forward, keeping the rifle ready. Blood. Too much of it soaking through his coat. A bullet wound, if she had to guess. Not something a man did to himself as a ruse. Tori glanced back at the house, then down at the dying man. Decisions had always come quickly to her, even before necessity had honed the skill to a fine edge. "Damn it all," she muttered, setting the rifle aside to hook her arms beneath his shoulders. He was heavy, dead weight against her. "If you're playing me for a fool, mister, you'll wish that bullet had finished you." Dragging him through the snow, took everything she had, her back screaming in protest, feet slipping in the icy drifts. By the time they reached the house, Tori was gasping, her arms trembling with exertion. She kicked the door open, the sudden warmth almost painful against her frozen cheeks. "Mother Iris," she called, struggling to keep the man from slipping to the floor. Iris Sullivan appeared in the kitchen doorway, a dish rag in her gnarled hands. At 62, Iris retained the erect posture and sharp eyes of a younger woman, though grief had carved deep lines into her face. Those eyes widened at the sight before her. "Victoria? What in heavens?" "He's shot. Help me get him to the table." Tori was already moving, half dragging the man across the wooden floor, leaving a trail of melting snow and blood. Iris hesitated only a moment before springing into action with surprising agility, clearing the kitchen table with one sweep of her arm. Together, they heaved the unconscious man onto it. "Benjamin," Tori asked, already cutting away the stranger's coat with kitchen shears. Still sleeping, thank the Lord. Iris peered at the man's face. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition perhaps, or memory, but it vanished so quickly Tori couldn't be sure. Who is he? I don't know. Tori exposed the wound, a ugly hole just below the right collarbone. Not immediately fatal, but without treatment, the blood loss would kill him. But he's been shot, and recently. As a doctor's daughter, Tori had assisted with enough procedures to know what needed doing. She hadn't chosen this life, but she had adapted to it, learning to stitch wounds, set bones, and deliver calves with the same precision her father had shown in his Boston practice. "Boil water," she instructed, not looking up, "and bring my medical kit from under the bed. The good whiskey, too." While Iris hurried to comply, Tori searched the man's pockets. A folding knife, a few dollars, and a small leather-bound journal, its pages darkened with blood. "What are you doing?" Iris asked, returning with the medical kit. "Checking for identification." Tori set the journal aside. "Help me get his coat off." Together, they worked the sodden garment from the unconscious man. He was well built, his hands calloused from work. Not a city man, then. The wound looked worse, fully exposed, angry and red against pale skin. "The bullet's still in there," Tori murmured, probing gently around the wound. "I'll have to get it out." "Victoria!" Iris's voice was low, cautious. "Think about what you're doing. This man could be anyone, a criminal, a murderer. He could also be innocent." Tori met her mother-in-law's gaze steadily. "Would you have me turn him out to die in the snow?" They both knew she wouldn't. Not after Caleb. Iris's shoulders sagged slightly. "I'll get the whiskey." Tori cleaned her hands, then the wound working methodically, as her father had taught her. The bullet hadn't gone deep, lodged against the collarbone. Lucky. She prepared her instruments, laying them out on a clean cloth. A small sound made her turn. Benjamin stood in the doorway, sleep-tousled and wide-eyed. "Mama! Ben!" Tori straightened, trying to block his view of the blood-covered table. "You should be in bed." "I heard voices," his eyes fixed on the stranger. "Is he dead?" "No, sweetheart, but he's hurt, and I need to help him." Tori glanced at Iris, who moved to shepherd the boy back to his room. "Go with Grandma Iris now." Benjamin ducked under his grandmother's reaching hand. "I want to help." "Ben, I'm not a baby. I can help." His chin lifted with the same stubborn tilt that had characterized his father. "You always say helping people is important." Tori hesitated. She didn't want him to see this, but the determination in his young face was unmistakable. Like his father once, Benjamin set his mind to something little could deter him. "All right," she finally conceded. "You can hand me things, but you stay at the head of the table away from the blood." Benjamin nodded solemnly, taking his position. Iris sighed, but brought a stool for the boy to stand on. "What's his name?" Benjamin whispered. "We don't know yet," Tori replied, pouring whiskey over her small forceps. "He was unconscious when I found him." Benjamin studied the man's face with the intense curiosity of childhood. "He looks like the pictures of knights in my book, the ones with scars from battles." Tori hadn't noticed the scar before a thin, pale line cutting through the stranger's right eyebrow. It gave his unconscious face a perpetual look of slight questioning. "All right," she said, taking a deep breath. "I need to remove the bullet. Ben, when I ask for something, hand it to me quickly. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, his small face serious. "Iris, I need you to hold him down. If he wakes during this, I know what to do," Iris said grimly, positioning herself to pin the man's shoulders. Tori took a steadying breath, then inserted the forceps into the wound. The man jerked a groan, escaping his lips, but remained unconscious. She worked quickly, probing for the bullet, aware of Benjamin's wide eyes watching her every move. "Gauze," she said, and her son handed her a clean square with trembling fingers. The lamplight cast their shadows on the wall, a tableau of desperation. A woman fighting to save a stranger's life. A boy helping with tools too big for his small hands. An older woman holding down a man who might be friend or foe. The scene struck Tori with sudden poignancy, her son stepping into a role no child should have to fill, yet doing it with a steadiness that made her heart ache with both pride and sorrow. The bullet came free, with a wet sound dropping into the tin cup Tori had prepared. Benjamin leaned forward, fascinated despite himself. "Is that what hurt him?" he asked. "Yes," Tori answered, already pressing clean gauze against the now bleeding wound. "Small thing to cause so much damage, isn't it?" Benjamin nodded, his eyes darting between the bloody bullet and the unconscious man's face. "Will he live, Mama?" Tori hesitated. The man had lost a lot of blood, and infection was always a risk. "I hope so, Ben. We've done what we can. The rest is up to him." She stitched the wound closed with neat, even sutures. Her father would have been proud, then bandaged it tightly. Throughout the procedure, the man remained mercifully unconscious, though his breathing had strengthened. "There," she said finally, wiping her blood-stained hands on a towel. "Now we wait." Benjamin yawned, the excitement finally giving way to fatigue. Iris took his hand. "Come along, young man. You've done your duty. Now it's time for sleep." This time he didn't resist trailing after his grandmother with one last curious glance at the stranger on their kitchen table. When they'd gone, Tori sagged against the counter, the adrenaline draining from her body, leaving her shaky and exhausted. What had she done bringing this man into their home, this wounded stranger with his cryptic words that echoed her husband's last moments? She glanced at the blood-soaked journal on the counter. Perhaps there were answers there. But no, that felt like a violation. Instead, she turned to the more immediate task of making the man comfortable. With considerable effort, Tori managed to move him from the kitchen table to the small room off the main living area. It had been Caleb's study, once converted to a storeroom after his death. A narrow cot still stood against one wall, rarely used except when traveling salesmen needed a place to stay. She removed the man's boots and covered him with quilts. In the softer light of the bedroom lamp, his features seemed less harsh. A strong jaw, now slack with unconsciousness, dark hair peppered with early gray at the temples. Perhaps 40, perhaps younger. Hardship aged a man quickly out here. His fever started before dawn. Tori, dozing in the chair beside him, woke to his restless movements and incoherent murmurs. She bathed his face with cool water, checking the wound for signs of infection. The skin around the stitches was red and hot to the touch, but not yet showing the angry streaks that signaled serious infection. "Joseph," he muttered, thrashing weakly against the blankets. "Run! They know." Tori pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "Shh, you're safe." His eyes opened briefly, startlingly blue and unfocused. "Can't let them find the book." "No one will find anything," she soothed, unsure what he meant, but recognizing the desperation in his fever-bright eyes. "Rest now." He subsided, slipping back into unconsciousness. Tori sat back, exhaustion tugging at her. Who was this man? What trouble had followed him to her door, the journal? Perhaps she should look after all. If he was running from the law, she needed to know. If he was in danger, they were all in danger now. Reluctantly, she retrieved the blood-stained book from the kitchen. The leather cover was worn smooth, with handling the pages swollen from blood and snow. Many of the entries were illegible now, the ink blurred beyond recognition. A folded paper slipped from between the pages, a photograph remarkably undamaged. 3 men stood before a rough wooden building, arms slung over each other's shoulders, in the easy camaraderie of friendship. Tori's heart stopped. The man on the left was Caleb, younger, beardless, but unmistakably her husband. She'd never seen this photograph before, never known of its existence. Her hands trembled as she turned it over. Written in faded ink, CSJRFH Laramie 82, CS Caleb Sullivan. The other men were strangers to her, one tall and dark-haired, the other shorter with a full beard. The middle man, could that be the stranger now lying in her house? The image was unclear, the face partially shadowed by a hat. Tori slipped the photograph into her pocket, her mind reeling. Whatever connection this man had to Caleb, she would keep it to herself for now. At least until she understood what it meant. For 3 days, the stranger hovered between life and death, his fever climbing, then breaking, only to rise again. Tori tended him between her regular chores, catching sleep when she could. Benjamin helped bringing fresh water and clean bandages with solemn importance. Iris watched it all with an unreadable expression, her assistance reliable but somehow distant. Several times, Tori caught her mother-in-law studying the unconscious man with an intensity that seemed out of place. When questioned, Iris would simply shake her head and find some task that needed immediate attention. On the 4th day, Tori entered the sick room to find the stranger's eyes open and clear. He tensed when she approached his gaze, darting around the unfamiliar room. "Where?" His voice was a dry rasp. "My farm," Tori said, setting down the fresh bandages she'd brought. "About 15 miles northeast of Clearwater." He tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "I wouldn't do that just yet," she advised, pressing him gently back onto the pillow. "You've been shot. The bullet's out, but you lost a lot of blood." He submitted, though tension remained in his body. "How long?" 4 days. "You had a fever." Tori poured water from a pitcher into a cup. "Here." Small sips. He drank obediently, his eyes never leaving her face. When he'd finished, he asked, "Who are you?" "Victoria Sullivan. Most call me Tori." She set the cup aside. "And you?" A hesitation brief but noticeable. "Owen. Owen Hayes." "Well, Mr. Hayes, you're lucky to be alive. Another hour in that storm and you'd have frozen before the blood loss got you." Tori began unwrapping his bandages to check the wound. "Do you remember how you got shot?" Another pause. "Disagreement." "Must have been some disagreement." The wound looked better, still red, but the swelling had gone down. "The bullet was lodged against your collarbone. Half an inch lower, it would have hit something vital." "Wouldn't be the first time luck's taken my side." His voice was stronger now, a deep baritone with the faint trace of a southern accent. Tori applied fresh salve to the wound. "And the man who shot you won't be looking for me." Something in his tone suggested the man in question was in no condition to look for anyone. Tori decided not to press further. The less she knew, perhaps, the better. "You have a child," he said suddenly. She glanced up, surprised. "Yes, Benjamin. He's 9. He was here during—" Hayes gestured vaguely at his shoulder. "He insisted on helping." A ghost of a smile touched the man's lips. "Brave kid." "Too brave sometimes." Tori finished with the new bandages. "There's an older woman, too. My mother-in-law, Iris. Husband. Dead." The word came out more sharply than she'd intended. 2 years now." Hayes nodded, accepting this without comment. After a moment, he asked, "My things. Your coat was ruined. The rest is there." Tori indicated a chair where his belongings lay neatly folded. "Including your journal. It got wet and bloody, I'm afraid." His eyes flickered to the small leather book. "You read it?" "No. It wasn't entirely a lie." She hadn't read it, just found the photograph. He seemed to accept this, his body relaxing slightly. "Thank you for everything. You needed help. Not everyone would have given it." Tori met his gaze steadily. "No, they wouldn't." Something passed between them, then a recognition, perhaps, of shared experience. The knowledge that the world was often cruel and kindness came at a price. The moment was broken by the sound of small feet running down the hallway. Benjamin appeared in the doorway, skidding to a stop when he saw the stranger awake. "Mama, oh." The boy's excitement gave way to sudden shyness. Hayes regarded the child with genuine interest. "Hello, Benjamin." Benjamin edged into the room. "You know my name. Your mother told me. I hear you helped patch me up." Pride straightened the boy's narrow shoulders. "I handed Mama the tools. And the gauze. Then I owe you my thanks." Hayes's tone held none of the condescension adults often used with children. "That's important work." Benjamin beamed, his shyness forgotten. "Does your shoulder hurt real bad? I broke my arm last year when I fell from the hayloft. It hurt something awful." "Benjamin," Tori admonished gently, "Mr. Hayes needs rest, not interrogation." "It's all right," Hayes assured her. "And yes, it hurts some. But I've had worse." "Like what?" Benjamin asked, eyes wide. "Ben, got thrown from a horse once, broke 3 ribs and my leg." Benjamin winced sympathetically. "Bet that hurt worse than a bullet." "Differently, but yes, worse in some ways." Hayes shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position. "Your mother did good work. Doctor in town couldn't have done better." "We don't go to the doctor in town," Benjamin said with the blunt honesty of children. "He doesn't like us, since Papa—" "Benjamin." Tori's voice was sharper now. "Go help Grandma Iris with lunch." The boy looked ready to protest, but something in his mother's expression changed his mind. "Yes, ma'am." He gave Hayes one last curious look before disappearing. "I'm sorry," Tori said when he'd gone. "He doesn't get much company." "No need to apologize. He's a good boy." Hayes studied her face. "Not welcome in town." Tori busied herself straightening the already neat bedside table. "It's complicated." "Usually is." He didn't press further, which Tori appreciated. "You should rest," she said, gathering the soiled bandages. "I'll bring some broth later." Hayes caught her wrist as she turned to leave his grip firm, but not painful. "Mrs. Sullivan?" She looked back at him, startled by the contact. "I won't bring trouble to your door. As soon as I'm able, I'll move on." Tori nodded, oddly affected by the intensity in his blue eyes. "Rest, Mr. Hayes. We'll worry about the future when you can stand without opening that wound." Iris was uncharacteristically silent as she stirred the soup pot. Tori, slicing bread at the table, waited for the questions she knew were coming. "He's awake, then," Iris finally said, not turning from the stove. "Yes, fever's broken. The worst has passed." "And his name? Owen Hayes." Iris's stirring faltered just for a moment. "I see. You know him?" Tori asked directly. "No." The answer came too quickly. "Why would I?" "You've been acting strangely since he arrived, going into his room when you thought I wasn't looking." Iris turned her face composed. "I was checking if he needed anything." "While he was unconscious." A flash of something anger-fear crossed the older woman's features. "I don't care for your tone, Victoria. And I don't care for secrets, Mother Iris." Tori set down the knife. "If you know something about this man—" "I don't." Iris turned back to the stove. "But men who arrive with bullet wounds rarely bring good fortune with them." Tori couldn't argue with that. "He says he'll leave as soon as he's able." "Good." Iris ladled soup into bowls. "The sooner the better." Tori wanted to press further, but Benjamin entered, effectively ending the conversation. She resolved to watch Iris more carefully. Her mother-in-law knew something or suspected something about their guest. The next few days established a routine. Hayes grew stronger, moving from the bed to a chair by the second day, taking short walks around the small room by the third. Tori changed his bandages, brought him meals, and limited their conversations to his recovery and the weather. Benjamin, however, had no such restraint. He spent every moment Tori allowed in Hayes's room, peppering the man with questions about his travels, his scar, a knife fight in Montana, and whether he knew how to track animals. He did. To Tori's surprise, Hayes showed remarkable patience with the boy, answering his questions thoughtfully and telling him stories about life on the frontier. He taught Benjamin to tie complex knots with a piece of string and showed him how to whittle simple shapes from scrap wood Tori provided. Watching them together brought a confusing mix of emotions. Joy at seeing her son so animated, he'd been too serious since Caleb's death. Guilt that she couldn't provide this kind of male attention herself. And an unsettling warmth at the gentle way Hayes handled Benjamin's endless curiosity. On the fifth day, Tori found Hayes standing at the small window in his room, looking out at the snow-covered yard. He'd dressed in his own clothes, though the shirt hung looser than it likely had before his injury. "You shouldn't be up so much," she admonished, setting down clean towels. "I've imposed long enough." He turned from the window color in his face that hadn't been there before. "I can ride by tomorrow." "Don't be ridiculous. That wound needs at least another week to heal properly." "Mrs. Sullivan." "Tori," she corrected automatically. "If you're going to bleed on my kitchen table, you might as well use my name." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Tori, then. I appreciate everything you've done, but I can't stay." "Why not?" The question slipped out before she could consider it. "I have business that needs tending." "Business that got you shot." His expression closed. "I've already brought enough risk to your family." "What kind of risk?" Tori folded her arms. "Mr. Hayes, if there's danger coming to my home, I deserve to know." He regarded her steadily, seeming to weigh his next words. "I'm a bounty hunter. The man who shot me was wanted for murder and robbery. Is, he corrected. But he won't be following me. He took a bullet too, and his was better placed." Tori absorbed this. A bounty hunter. That explained the journal-likely records of men he tracked. It might even explain the photograph of Caleb, though the thought sent a chill through her. "There are others," Hayes continued. "His associates. If they learn I'm here—" "How would they? We're isolated, especially in winter. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and they don't exactly come calling." "It's a risk. Life is risk, Mr. Hayes." Tori sighed. "At least give yourself a few more days. The wound could reopen if you ride too soon." He seemed about to argue further when a sound from the doorway drew their attention. Benjamin stood there, eyes wide with excitement. "You're a bounty hunter, like in the stories." Hayes shot Tori an apologetic look. "Something like that." "Do you catch bad men? Do you have a special gun? Can you teach me to shoot?" "Benjamin," Tori interrupted, "Mr. Hayes needs rest, not an interrogation. And eavesdropping is rude." "I wasn't eavesdropping. I was coming to tell you that Grandma found Mr. Hayes's journal in the kitchen and she's reading it." Tori's stomach dropped. Hayes straightened, all traces of weakness vanishing. "Excuse me!" Tori said, already moving toward the door. Benjamin, stay with Mr. Hayes. She found Iris in the kitchen, the blood-stained journal open in her hands. The older woman looked up as Tori entered, her face pale eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. You had no right, Tori said, keeping her voice low. Those are his private things. I had every right. Iris closed the journal carefully. He's in our home near my grandson. That doesn't give you permission to... He's hunting the Hollister gang. Tori froze. The Hollister gang. The name was familiar, a group of outlaws who'd terrorized parts of Wyoming and Colorado over the past few years. And the gang rumored to have connections to Caleb's death. How do you know that? Iris held up the journal. It's all here. Names, locations, suspected crimes. He's been tracking them for over a year. Tori took the journal from Iris's hands, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. Why? You should ask him that. Iris's voice was oddly gentle. But Victoria, everything is not as we thought. Not with Caleb, not with any of it. What are you talking about? Everything all right? Both women turned to find Hayes standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support. His gaze went immediately to the journal in Tori's hands. I see, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Tori began. Benjamin said, It doesn't matter. Hayes's expression was carefully neutral. I'll be gone by morning. Owen Hayes, Iris said suddenly, her voice stronger than Tori had heard in months. Son of Franklin Hayes, if I'm not mistaken. Hayes stilled surprise briefly, crossing his features. You knew my father. I knew of him. My husband George Sullivan spoke highly of him. Iris straightened, looking suddenly more like the formidable woman she'd been before grief bent her shoulders. You have his eyes. A heavy silence filled the kitchen. Tori looked between them, feeling excluded from some significant exchange. Would someone please explain what's going on? She finally asked. Hayes looked at Iris. You haven't told her. Told me what? Tori demanded. Iris sighed deeply. It's a long story, Victoria, one I'm not sure you're ready to hear. I think I'll decide that for myself. Before Iris could respond, the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats reached them. Tori moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain. Riders, she said, squinting through the afternoon glare on snow. 3 of them. Hayes was beside her in an instant, his weakness seemingly forgotten. He studied the approaching figures, his body tense. Do you know them? Tori asked. No, but the way his hand moved instinctively to his hip, where a gun would normally rest, told her he expected trouble. Where's your rifle? Above the fireplace. Get it, and get the boy out of sight. The urgency in his voice sparked fear in Tori's chest. Who do you think it is? I don't know. But 3 men riding together in this weather aren't likely coming for a social call. Hayes turned to Iris. Is there a cellar somewhere to hide? Under the pantry. There's a trap door beneath the rug. Good. Take Benjamin and go there. Don't come out unless one of us calls you. Iris nodded, already moving to find her grandson. Tori retrieved the rifle, checking it was loaded, as Hayes positioned himself beside the front window, partially hidden by the curtain. If it's who I think it might be, he said quietly, let me do the talking. And if it's not, his blue eyes met hers hard as steel. Then we may have a problem. The riders were close now, their approach unhurried but deliberate. As they drew near the house, Tori could make out details, 3 men well-dressed for the weather. The leader rode a handsome black horse, his bearing confident. Not outlaws then, or at least not obviously so. It's Lawrence Pike, she said, recognizing the prominent man. The banker from town. Hayes's expression darkened. Pike. Yes, and that's Sheriff Thompson with him. I don't know the third man. Hemmings. Hayes supplied his voice tight. Deputy Sheriff? Torrey glanced at him sharply. You know them. I know of them. There was something in his tone that raised alarms, but before she could question him further, the riders reached the yard. Stay behind me, Hayes instructed, moving toward the door, and keep that rifle ready. Pike dismounted first, his expensive coat marking him as a man of means. He was in his early 50s with graying hair and the well-fed look of someone who'd never missed a meal. Sheriff Thompson followed a tall, hard-faced man whose badge glinted in the winter sun. Hemmings remained mounted, hands resting casually on his saddle horn. Pike approached the house, climbing the porch steps, with the confidence of a man who owned more property than most would see in a lifetime. Just be still, Hayes murmured to Torrey. Let's hear what they want. A firm knock sounded on the door. Torrey took a steadying breath, then opened it, keeping the rifle visible but lowered. Mr. Pike, she said coolly, this is unexpected. Pike removed his hat, revealing thinning hair carefully combed over a balding pate. Mrs. Sullivan, sorry to intrude on your afternoon. May we come in? It's bitter cold out here. What can I help you with? Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just a few matters of business to discuss. The loan on your property primarily. Torrey's grip on the rifle tightened. The loan, of course. Caleb had borrowed against the farm to expand their acreage, a debt she'd been struggling to repay since his death. I'm not due for a payment until spring. Ah, well, that's part of what we need to discuss. Pike's gaze shifted past her, hardening when he spotted Hayes standing in the shadows. I see you have company. Sheriff Thompson stepped forward, his hand moving casually toward his holster. Everything all right, Mrs. Sullivan? Perfectly fine, Sheriff. My guest was just leaving. Guest? Thompson's cold eyes fixed on Hayes. Don't believe we've had the pleasure. Hayes moved into the light, his posture deliberately casual, despite the tension Torrey could feel radiating from him. Owen Hayes, just passing through. Got caught in the storm a few nights back, Torrey added. I offered shelter. Thompson and Pike exchanged a look that raised the hairs on Torrey's neck. Mighty generous of you, Mrs. Sullivan, Thompson said, especially given your circumstances. The implication was clear, a widow alone taking in a male stranger. The old familiar anger rose in Torrey's chest, but she swallowed it down. Now wasn't the time. As I said, he was just leaving. Now, about that loan? Actually, Pike interrupted smoothly, I think we'd better come in and discuss a few things. His pleasant tone did nothing to mask the command. Sheriff Thompson has some questions for your guest. Torrey hesitated, but Hayes's slight nod decided her. Very well. She stepped back, allowing the men to enter. The small front room seemed to shrink with their presence. Pike took a seat without invitation, removing his gloves with precise movements. Thompson remained standing, his gaze never leaving Hayes. Mr. Hayes, the sheriff said, what brings you to these parts? Hunting. Hayes replied easily. Got separated from my partner in the storm. Hunting what exactly? Whatever pays. A cold smile touched Thompson's lips. A bounty hunter, then. Hayes shrugged, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wound. When it suits me. Interesting profession. Thompson circled slowly like a predator. Dangerous, too. It has its moments. Pike cleared his throat. Mrs. Sullivan, about your loan. I've been reviewing the accounts, and I'm afraid there's been an oversight. Torrey forced herself to focus on Pike, though every instinct screamed to watch the increasingly tense exchange between Hayes and the sheriff. What kind of oversight? The terms included a clause about timely payments. You've been, shall we say, inconsistent. I've never missed a payment, Tory countered, anger flaring. I may have been late once or twice, but I've always paid. Late is still a breach of terms. Pike's smile was reptilian. I'm afraid the bank may need to reconsider the loan. You mean foreclose? I mean protect our investment. Pike leaned forward, his voice softening to false concern. You know there are options. The land is valuable. I could make you a private offer, less than market value, of course, given the circumstances, but enough to settle your debts and give you a fresh start somewhere else. Hori's blood ran cold. So that was it. Pike wanted her land, had probably always wanted it. The farm isn't for sale. Everything has a price, Mrs. Sullivan. Pike's gaze slid meaningfully to Benjamin's toy horse on the mantel. Especially when there's a child to consider. Before Tory could respond, Hayes spoke up. You seem very interested in this property, Mr. Pike. Any particular reason? Pike's composure slipped just for an instant, revealing something hard and ugly beneath the banker's veneer. Just looking out for a widow's interests. How noble. Hayes's tone suggested it was anything but. And the sheriff's interest is that professional courtesy or something more. Thompson's hand moved to his gun. Careful, Hayes. That sounds dangerously close to an accusation. Just an observation. Hayes remained outwardly relaxed, though Tory could see the tension in his shoulders. 3 important men riding out in the cold to discuss a small farm loan. Makes a man wonder. Pike stood abruptly. I can see this isn't a good time. We'll continue this discussion later, Mrs. Sullivan. He donned his hat, nodding to Thompson. Sheriff? Thompson held Hayes's gaze a moment longer. We'll be seeing you around, Hayes. Looking forward to it. The 3 men left with barely concealed hostility. Tory watched from the window as they mounted and rode away, their postures rigid with thwarted purpose. They'll be back, Hayes said quietly. What was that about? Tory turned to him, searching his face. You know them, or at least you know something about them. Hayes was silent for a long moment, conflict visible in his eyes. Finally, he sighed. Pike is connected to the Hollister gang. I believe he launders their money through his bank. The Hollister gang. Tory's mind raced back to the photograph in her pocket. The ones you're hunting. Yes. Why, what's your interest in them? Hayes's face hardened. They killed my brother. Tory stared at him, the pieces slowly falling into place. The name you called out in your fever. Joseph. Joseph Reed, my half-brother. Different fathers, same mother. Hayes looked away. He got involved with them about 2 years ago. When he tried to leave, he didn't need to finish. 2 years ago. The same time Caleb died. The same gang rumored to be involved. And Sheriff Thompson, Tory asked, her mouth dry, is he involved too? I believe he's their protection. Ensures the law looks the other way. Hayes met her gaze directly. Mrs. Sullivan, Tory, I need to know. What was your husband's connection to the Hollisters? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. I don't know, she admitted finally. But I found a photograph in your journal. Caleb was in it with 2 other men. Hayes didn't look surprised. May I see it? With reluctant fingers, Tory withdrew the photograph from her pocket, handling it as if it might burn. Hayes took it gently, studying the 3 smiling faces. This is Joseph, he said, pointing to the dark-haired man in the middle. My brother. And this, he indicated the bearded man on the right, is Frank Hollister. And Caleb. Tory could barely form the words. Was he part of the gang? Hayes looked up, his expression softening at what he must have seen in her face. I don't know. That's what I've been trying to figure out. My husband wasn't a criminal. The words came automatically, a defense she'd repeated countless times over the past 2 years. Perhaps not. Hayes handed back the photograph. But he knew Joseph, and he knew Hollister. That puts him in the middle of something very dangerous. The trapdoor to the cellar creaked open, revealing Iris's gray head. They're gone. Yes, Tori answered hastily, pocketing the photograph. It's safe. Iris emerged, fully helping Benjamin up after her. The boy looked around with wide eyes. Were those bad men, Mama? No, sweetheart. Just Mr. Pike from the bank talking about boring grown-up things. Tori forced a smile. Why don't you go gather eggs for dinner? Benjamin looked dubious, but accepted the task, grabbing his coat and heading out the back door after a curious glance at Hayes. When he was gone, Iris faced them both, her expression grave. You told her about the Hollisters. Hayes nodded. Some, not all. It's time she knew the rest. Iris sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 62 years. Victoria, sit down. I'll stand. Tori crossed her arms, bracing for whatever was coming. Iris sighed. Caleb wasn't a horse thief. He wasn't a criminal at all. I know that. No, you don't know everything. Iris's gnarled hands twisted in her lap. Caleb was working with the previous sheriff, John Miller. He was informing on the Hollister gang. Tori stared at her mother-in-law, disbelief warring with a strange dawning hope. He befriended some of them, pretended to be interested in joining, fed information back to Miller. Iris's voice grew stronger as she spoke. That's how he knew Joseph Reed. And Frank Hollister. Why didn't you tell me this before? Tori demanded, anger mixing with relief. For 2 years, I've lived with everyone believing my husband was a criminal, that I was married to a thief. Because it wasn't safe, Iris shot back. Miller was killed 3 weeks after Caleb, shot in what looked like a robbery gone wrong. I knew then that someone in town was connected to the gang, someone powerful. Pike, Hayes supplied quietly. Iris nodded. I suspected as much. And Thompson, who took over as sheriff. I couldn't prove anything, but I knew if they suspected Caleb had told me anything, you and Benjamin would be in danger too. Tori's legs suddenly felt weak. She sank onto the sofa, her mind reeling. So the horse theft, the shootout. A cover. Caleb was supposed to meet Miller with information. Instead, he was ambushed. Iris's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He died protecting the real identity of the gang's leader. Which you think is Pike, Tori said, looking to Hayes. Or Thompson, he agreed grimly. Either way, your husband was a brave man, Mrs. Sullivan, not a criminal. Tori closed her eyes, emotions washing over her in overwhelming waves. Relief that Caleb's name might finally be cleared. Rage at the injustice they'd suffered. Fear for what this knowledge might mean for their safety. And beneath it all, a growing certainty that Owen Hayes's arrival was no coincidence. You knew, she said, opening her eyes to fix Hayes with an accusing stare. You came here deliberately. Hayes had the grace to look uncomfortable. I suspected your husband might have information I needed. I didn't know he was working against the gang. So you used us, used my family. No. His denial was swift, his blue eyes earnest. I was tracking Frank Hollister when I was shot. Ending up at your door was genuine chance. But staying wasn't, Iris interjected. Was it? Hayes held Tori's gaze steadily. When I saw your name on the mail by the door, Sullivan, I wondered if there might be a connection. but I was in no condition to investigate anything. And now, Tori asked, a new hardness entering her voice. What do you want now, Mr. Hayes? The same thing I've wanted since Joseph was killed. Justice. His expression softened. And I think you deserve that too. Before Tori could respond, Benjamin burst through the back door, breathless and wide-eyed. Mama, there's another rider coming, a lady on a big brown horse. Tori exchanged alarmed glances with Hayes, who was already moving toward the window. Just one? He asked, peering out. Yes. Benjamin's excitement was palpable. She's wearing a fancy coat, like the ladies in my picture books. Hayes's brow furrowed as he studied the approaching rider. I don't recognize her. Tori joined him at the window. The rider was indeed a woman wrapped in a fine wool coat, her face obscured by a fur-trimmed hood. She rode with the confidence of someone accustomed to horseback, guiding her mount easily through the snow. Do you know her? Hayes asked. Tori shook her head. No, we don't get many visitors, especially women alone. Could be innocent. After Pike and Thompson's visit, I doubt it. The woman reined in before the house, dismounting with practiced grace. She removed her hood, revealing a striking face framed by auburn hair pinned severely at the nape of her neck. That's a mighty fine horse, Benjamin observed, pressing his face to the window. Can I go see? No, Tori and Hayes answered simultaneously. A firm knock sounded on the door. Tori reached for the rifle, but Hayes shook his head. Let me answer it, he said quietly. If it's trouble, better it finds me first. Tori hesitated, then nodded, positioning herself where she could intervene if necessary. Hayes opened the door, his body blocking the entrance. The woman looked momentarily startled to see a man, but recovered quickly. Good afternoon. I'm looking for Victoria Sullivan. And you are? Hayes's tone was polite but wary. Caroline Reed. The woman's gaze shifted past Hayes to Tori. Mrs. Sullivan. Tori stepped forward. I'm Victoria Sullivan. Caroline's relief was palpable. Thank goodness. I was afraid I had the wrong farm. Her eyes returned to Hayes, narrowing slightly. Owen Hayes. Hayes stiffened. How do you know my name? A small, sad smile touched Caroline's lips. I've been looking for you for a very long time, Mr. Hayes. I believe we have a mutual interest in the Hollister gang. Her gaze encompassed both of them. And in clearing the name of Caleb Sullivan, Tori felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Who are you, really? Caroline straightened her bearing, suddenly reminiscent of someone used to command. My name is Caroline Reed. Joseph Reed was my husband. Her eyes fixed on Hayes. Which makes me your sister-in-law, Mr. Hayes. And I believe I have information that will help us all. The kitchen fell silent as Caroline Reed's words hung in the air. Outside, the winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered yard, the light fading earlier each day as December deepened. Tori glanced at Hayes, noting the rigid set of his shoulders, the careful blankness that had replaced his usual expression. Joseph's wife, he repeated flatly. Caroline nodded. For 3 years, until his death. He never mentioned being married. A flicker of pain crossed Caroline's face. No, I don't imagine he would have. Our parting wasn't amicable. Benjamin pressed against Tori's side, eyes wide with curiosity at the stranger. Tori placed a protective hand on his shoulder. Perhaps this conversation should continue inside. Iris suggested, her practical nature asserting itself. The cold carries voices farther than you'd think. Hayes hesitated, then stepped aside to allow Caroline entry. She moved with the deliberate grace of a woman accustomed to being watched, removing her gloves and unbuttoning her expensive coat. Your horse? Tori said, remembering her manners despite the surreal situation. Benjamin can take it to the barn. I'd appreciate that. Caroline smiled at the boy. His name is Samson. He's gentle, but he doesn't like sudden movements. Benjamin straightened pride, evident in his posture at being entrusted with such a task. I know how to handle horses, ma'am. My papa taught me. I'm sure you'll do wonderfully. Caroline removed a saddlebag from her shoulder. Just be careful with this. It's precious to me. Tori helped her son into his coat, murmuring instructions to simply stable the horse and return immediately. When Benjamin had gone leading the magnificent bay toward the barn with careful steps, the atmosphere in the room shifted grown-up tension, replacing the momentary lightness. You said you've been looking for Mr. Hayes? Tori prompted, gesturing for Caroline to take a seat at the kitchen table. Yes. Caroline set her saddlebag on the floor beside her chair. For almost 2 years now. Wah! Hayes remained standing, distrust evident in his posture. Caroline met his gaze directly. Because Joseph asked me to find you before he died. He left something for you. Joseph and I weren't exactly on speaking terms near the end. I know. Caroline's voice softened. He regretted that very much. Not enough to stay out of Hollister's gang. A flash of anger crossed Caroline's face. You don't know everything that happened, Mr. Hayes. Joseph made mistakes, yes, but he tried to make them right. Getting himself killed in the process. Owen, Iris interrupted sharply. Perhaps you should listen to what the lady has to say before passing judgment. Hayes subsided, though tension still radiated from him. Tori studied Caroline more carefully. The fine quality of her clothing, the educated precision of her speech, the subtle but unmistakable signs of wealth. Not at all what she would have expected for the wife of a gang member. How did you find us? Tori asked. This farm isn't exactly on the main road. I didn't find you, Mrs. Sullivan. I found him. Caroline nodded toward Hayes. I've been tracking the Hollister gang since Joseph's death, gathering information. When I heard rumors of a bounty hunter asking questions about them, I followed the trail. To Clearwater. To Sheriff Thompson's jurisdiction, yes. Caroline's lips thinned. I was in town when word spread about a widow harboring a strange man. It wasn't difficult to connect the dots. Tori's cheeks warmed at the implication. The town gossips had been busy, it seemed. And your interest in clearing my husband's name? She asked, steering the conversation back to Caroline's earlier statement. Joseph kept a journal, Caroline explained. Names, dates, details of the gang's operations, including the truth about your husband's role as an informant. Hope flared in Tori's chest. You have proof, actual proof, that Caleb wasn't a criminal. I do. Caroline reached for her saddlebag, extracting a leather-bound journal similar to the one Hayes carried, though in better condition. Joseph wrote everything down. He was meticulous that way. She placed the journal on the table, opening it to a marked page. Tori leaned forward, her heart racing as she read the neat handwriting. March 15th, 1883. Sullivan met with Sheriff Miller again. He's getting suspicious about Pike's involvement. F says not to worry, but I think Sullivan knows more than he lets on. He keeps asking about the bank transactions. Tori's vision blurred with unexpected tears. Concrete evidence at last that Caleb had been working against the gang, not with them. There's more, Caroline said gently. Details about meetings information your husband passed to Sheriff Miller. And this? She turned to another marked page dated just a week before Caleb's death. April 2nd, 1883. Sullivan says he has proof Pike is laundering money through the bank. Ledgers showing deposits that don't match official records. Meeting arranged with Miller for the 9th. F nervous drinking more than usual. Something doesn't feel right. F is Frank Hollister, Hayes asked, having moved to read over Tori's shoulder. Caroline nodded. Joseph's childhood friend, and the one who recruited him into the gang. The same Frank Hollister I found dead 3 days ago, Hayes said grimly, shot in the back at close range. What? Caroline paled. Frank is dead. You sound surprised. Wasn't he part of the gang that killed your husband? It's complicated. Caroline's fingers twisted together in her lap. Frank wasn't what you think. Neither was Joseph. Iris, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. I think it's time we all laid our cards on the table, don't you? No more half-truths or suspicions. Hayes and Caroline exchanged a long look, some unspoken communication passing between them. Very well, Caroline said finally. But first I need your word that what I'm about to tell you goes no further. Lives depend on it, including your own. You have it, Tori said without hesitation. After 2 years of living under suspicion, the promise of truth was too compelling to resist. Caroline took a deep breath. Joseph wasn't just a member of the Hollister gang. He was working for the Pinkerton Detective Agency, investigating connections between the gang and several prominent citizens, including Lawrence Pike. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Tori stared at Caroline, trying to process this new information. Your husband was a Pinkerton agent, she asked, disbelief coloring her voice. No. He was recruited after he was already involved with the gang. Caroline's expression softened with old pain. We were having financial difficulties. Joseph took a job with Frank Hollister, not realizing what it really was until he was already implicated in a robbery. And the Pinkertons offered him a way out. Hayes surmised, his voice neutral. Yes, information in exchange for immunity. Caroline looked down at her clasped hands. I didn't know at first. He kept it from me, thinking it was safer. And Frank Hollister, Hayes pressed. Where does he fit in this tale? Frank was Joseph's handler of sorts. He'd been working for the Pinkertons for years, infiltrating gangs across the territory. Caroline met Hayes's skeptical gaze. I know how it sounds, but it's true. Frank was deep undercover, so deep that only a handful of people knew his real identity. Including Caleb, Tori said softly, the pieces falling into place. That's how he became involved. Caroline nodded. Caleb stumbled onto something at the bank, inconsistencies in the records. Instead of going to Sheriff Miller directly, he approached Frank, who recognized the opportunity. They brought Caleb into the operation, using him as a local informant, while maintaining the fiction that he was considering joining the gang. The front door opened, admitting a gust of cold air, and Benjamin, his cheeks pink from the cold. I put Samson in the stall next to Maple, he announced proudly. I gave him some hay, too. Thank you, Benjamin, Caroline smiled. You took very good care of him. Can I go check on Mr. Hayes's stitches now? Benjamin asked Tori, his attention already shifting to his next important task. He said I could help change the bandage. Tori hesitated, looking to Hayes, who gave a slight nod. All right, but wait in his room. Mr. Hayes will be there shortly. Benjamin scampered off, clearly pleased with his expanding responsibilities. When he was out of earshot, Tori turned back to Caroline. If what you're saying is true, then who really killed Joseph and Caleb? And now Frank Hollister. That's what I've been trying to determine. Caroline opened the journal again, flipping to the final entries. Joseph's last entry mentions a meeting between Caleb and Miller, but also notes that F is nervous. I believe Frank suspected a trap. Which it was, Hayes said grimly. Your husband was killed 2 days after that entry. And Caleb the week after, Tori added. Followed by Sheriff Miller. Caroline nodded. Someone discovered their investigation. someone who stood to lose everything if the truth came out. Pike, Hayes suggested. Or Sheriff Thompson, Iris interjected. He was Miller's deputy, perfectly positioned to take over after his death. Or both, Tori said quietly. They arrived together today, united in purpose. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen as they each considered the implications. If Pike and Thompson were working together, cleaning up loose ends from 2 years ago, then Hayes's presence at the Sullivan farm had put them all in danger. They know I'm here now, Hayes said, giving voice to Tori's concerns, and they'll have recognized you in town, he added to Caroline. We don't have much time. Time for what? Tori asked. To find the proof, Caleb discovered. Hayes's eyes were hard determined. The bank records that would expose Pike's operation. Caleb said he had copied some pages from Pike's private ledger, Iris said, speaking up after a long silence. He kept them hidden. Tori turned to her mother-in-law, shock reverberating through her. You knew about this? All this time? Guilt flashed across Iris's weathered features. Not everything. Just bits and pieces Caleb let slip. He was trying to protect us, Victoria. The less we knew, the safer we were. Where did he hide these records? Hayes asked, cutting through the tension. I don't know, Iris admitted it. He never told me. But he had a few hiding places around the farm. Tori's mind raced, thinking of all the places Caleb might have concealed something important. His study had been searched after his death, ostensibly by Sheriff Thompson looking for stolen property. If the records had been there, they would have been found. The barn, she said suddenly. There's a loose board in the hayloft behind the north wall. Caleb used to hide small treasures there for Benjamin to find. Hayes was already reaching for his coat. I'll check. No. Tori stood, her decision made. This is my husband's legacy, my farm. I'll go. Mrs. Sullivan. Tori, she corrected automatically. And this isn't a debate, Mr. Hayes. I know every inch of that loft. If there's something to find, I'll find it. Hayes looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have conveyed her determination. He nodded reluctantly. At least take the rifle. I'll be fine. It's my barn 50 yards from my house. Tori pulled on her coat. Keep an eye on Benjamin. The cold hit her like a physical blow as she stepped outside, the temperature dropping rapidly with the setting sun. Tori hurried across the yard, each breath clouding before her face. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open, the familiar smells of hay and livestock greeting her. The horses nickered softly at her entrance, their own mare Maple, and the new addition Samson, who regarded her with intelligent eyes. Tori patted Maple's neck absently, her gaze already lifted to the hayloft above. The ladder rungs were cold beneath her fingers as she climbed the wood smooth from years of use. The loft was darker than the main floor, the small window at the far end providing minimal light. Tori moved carefully across the hay-strewn boards, heading for the north wall. The loose board was where she remembered third from the left, near the corner. Tori knelt, working her fingers along the edge, until she found the slight give that indicated it wasn't nailed down. With a bit of effort, the board lifted, revealing the narrow space beneath. She had to lie flat on her stomach to reach into the darkness, her fingers exploring blindly. At first, she felt nothing but dust and bits of straw. Then her fingertips brushed against something solid, paper folded tightly into a small packet and wrapped in oilskin to protect it from moisture. Tori extracted it carefully, her heart pounding. The packet was secured with twine tied in Caleb's distinctive double knot. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped it, revealing several folded pages torn from a ledger. Even in the dim light, she could make out columns of figures, dates, and annotations in Caleb's neat handwriting. Notations in the margins linked certain transactions to names names Torrey recognized from town, respectable businessmen and ranchers, and beside several entries a single letter T. Thompson. Relief and vindication washed over her. Here was proof, real tangible proof of her husband's innocence and the corruption he'd died exposing. Carefully rewrapping the papers, Torrey replaced the loose board and made her way back down the ladder. The barn door creaked as she reached for it, making her jump. But it was just the wind picking up as night approached. Torrey slipped outside, clutching the precious packet inside her coat as she hurried back to the house. The kitchen was tense when she returned, Hayes pacing by the window, while Caroline and Iris spoke in low tones at the table. All three looked up as Torrey entered, their expressions a mixture of relief and anticipation. "You found something," Hayes said, noting the way her hand pressed against her coat. Torrey nodded, pulling out the oilskin packet. Ledger pages, with notes in Caleb's handwriting. She unwrapped it on the table, spreading the pages carefully. Hayes leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm against her hair as he studied the entries. "These are deposit records," he said. "Large sums coming in broken into smaller deposits." "Money laundering," Caroline confirmed, examining another page. "And look at these withdrawals, the same day as known Hollister gang robberies." "And the T," Torrey pointed to the annotation beside several entries. "Thompson," Hayes nodded. "Your husband was documenting the sheriff's payoffs." "No wonder they killed him," Iris murmured, grief and pride mingling in her voice. "He had the evidence to bring them all down." Torrey traced Caleb's handwriting with a gentle finger. He'd known the danger he was in, yet he'd persisted, determined to expose the corruption poisoning their town. Not a criminal, but a hero. "What do we do with this?" she asked, looking up at Hayes. "Take it to the authorities." "Which authorities?" he countered. "The sheriff is implicated, the mayor is Pike's brother-in-law, and the nearest federal marshal is 3 days' ride away." "There's a Pinkerton office in Cheyenne," Caroline suggested. "They'd take action, especially with one of their operatives murdered." "Cheyenne is 4 days in good weather," Hayes said. "We don't have that kind of time. Not now that Pike and Thompson know I'm here, and you've been asking questions in town." "Then what do you suggest?" Torrey challenged, frustration edging her voice. "We can't just sit here waiting for them to come back." Hayes's eyes met hers, steady and resolute. "We don't wait. We act. We use what we know to set a trap of our own." "What kind of trap?" Iris asked, skepticism clear in her tone. "One that forces them to reveal themselves." Hayes gathered the ledger pages, his expression grim. "Pike wants this farm, has for years, according to what you've said. Let's make him think he can have it for a price." Understanding dawned on Torrey. "Blackmail, of a sort." Hayes nodded. "We let him know we have evidence, but instead of threatening to expose him, we offer to sell it along with the farm, for enough money to give you and Benjamin a fresh start somewhere else." "He'd never agree," Iris objected. "He'd know it was a trap." "Not if we convince him it's genuine," Caroline interjected, warming to the idea. "Torrey is a widow struggling to support her son. If Pike believes she's willing to take the money and walk away with the promise to keep silent about what she knows, he might agree, thinking he can eliminate the threat once and for all," Hayes finished. "And then what?" Torrey demanded. "We take his money and run." "No." Hayes's voice hardened. "We get him to confess with witnesses present. People he doesn't control." "Who did you have in mind? Hank Peterson owns the general store, doesn't he? You mentioned he was the only one in town who treated you fairly." Torrey nodded slowly. "Yes. He and Caleb were friends. He never believed the rumors." "And Reverend Wallace," Iris suggested. He's new to town, only arrived last year. Pike wouldn't have had time to buy his loyalty. Reverend's wife, too, Tori added. She's been kind to Benjamin, sneaks him candy when we're in town. Caroline looked thoughtful. That might work. Respectable witnesses with no known connection to the Hollister investigation. It's risky, Hayes acknowledged, but less risky than waiting for Pike and Thompson to make their move. At least this way, we choose the battlefield. Tori considered the plan, weighing the dangers against the chance for justice, for clearing Caleb's name, for securing Benjamin's future. It was reckless, perhaps even foolhardy. But then so was pulling a wounded stranger from the snow. All right, she said finally. How do we start? We need to get word to Pike, Hayes replied. Something subtle but clear enough he'll understand the opportunity. I can do that, Caroline offered. I'm staying at the hotel in town. I can arrange to dine where Pike will overhear a conversation about the Sullivan farm and its potential sale. And the evidence? We hint at it, nothing more. Just enough to pique his interest. Tori nodded, a plan forming in her mind. I'll come to town tomorrow, visit Hank's store. Make a show of asking about property values elsewhere. Laramie, perhaps, or Cheyenne. Good, Hayes approved. That will reinforce the idea you're considering leaving. What about Thompson? Iris asked. He's the more dangerous of the two. We make sure he's occupied elsewhere when we meet with Pike, Hayes said. Caroline, can you create a distraction, something that would require the sheriff's attention but not be suspicious? Caroline considered this. I could report a theft from my room at the hotel. Nothing valuable but enough to require an official report. That might keep him busy for an hour or two, and it'll have to do. Hayes turned to Tori. We'll need to meet Pike somewhere private but not isolated, somewhere you'd plausibly agree to discuss business. The church, Tori suggested. It's respectable, and Reverend Wallace often opens it for community meetings. Pike wouldn't question meeting there. And we can position our witnesses nearby, Caroline added, within earshot but not immediately visible. Hayes nodded, his expression grave. It could work, but there are 100 things that could go wrong. Are you sure you want to take this risk? The question was directed at Tori, and she felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about clearing Caleb's name anymore. It was about justice for Joseph Reed and Frank Hollister, about ending the corruption that had poisoned Clearwater, about ensuring Benjamin could grow up without the shadow of false accusations. Yes, she said firmly. I'm sure. Something like admiration flickered in Hayes's blue eyes. Then we'd better work out the details. They spent the next hour planning, covering contingencies, assigning roles. Caroline would return to town that night, setting their plan in motion, with carefully placed comments at the hotel dining room. Tori would visit town the next day, reinforcing the narrative of a widow considering relocation. Hayes would remain at the farm, out of sight, preparing for their confrontation with Pike. The meeting itself would take place the following evening, giving them time to position their witnesses and ensure Thompson was occupied elsewhere. It was a hastily constructed plan, full of potential pitfalls, but it was the best they could manage under the circumstances. As they finalized the arrangements, Benjamin's sleepy voice came from the hallway. "Mama, is dinner soon? I'm hungry." The adults exchanged guilty glances, suddenly aware of how much time had passed. In the intensity of their planning, they'd neglected the ordinary routines of the household. "Yes, sweetheart," Tori called, rising from her chair. "I'll start it now. Can Mr. Hayes help me feed the chickens first? He promised to show me how to check for eggs that might be hidden." Hayes looked to Tori for permission, which she granted with a slight nod. As the two headed out the back door, Benjamin chattering excitedly, Tori turned to the stove, her mind still spinning with the day's revelations. "He's good with the boy," Iris observed quietly. "He's trying to win our trust," Tori replied, though without conviction. Perhaps Iris's knowing look suggested she wasn't fooled. Or perhaps he's simply a good man who recognizes another good man's son. Tori didn't respond, unwilling to examine too closely the warmth she felt watching Hayes with Benjamin. There were more pressing matters at hand than her confusing feelings toward Owen Hayes. Caroline rose, gathering her coat. "I should head back to town before it gets any darker. The sooner we set things in motion, the better." "You're welcome to stay," Tori offered automatically. "The roads aren't safe after dark." "Thank you, but I need to be seen at the hotel, establishing my presence." Caroline buttoned her coat with efficient movements. "Besides, 3 unexpected guests might strain even your generous hospitality. At least take some food for the journey." Tori wrapped bread and cheese in a cloth, pressing it into Caroline's hands. "Thank you." Caroline's expression softened. "Your husband would be proud of you, Mrs. Sullivan. Not everyone would have the courage to do what you're doing." "I'm not doing it for courage," Tori said simply. "I'm doing it because it's right, and because I'm tired of living with lies." Caroline nodded in understanding. "We'll succeed. We have truth on our side." "Truth hasn't always been enough," Iris commented dryly. "But it's a start." After Caroline departed, Tori busied herself preparing a simple dinner, finding comfort in the familiar routine. Iris set the table, her movements deliberate and precise as always, but Tori noticed a new energy in her mother-in-law, as if years of grief had partially lifted from her shoulders. Hayes and Benjamin returned as the stew was finishing, both pink-cheeked from the cold, Benjamin proudly carrying 4 fresh eggs. "Mr. Hayes showed me how to check under the hedge," the boy announced. "He says chickens sometimes lay eggs in secret places." "He's right," Tori smiled, taking the eggs. "Your father used to say the same thing." Benjamin beamed at the comparison, setting the table with unusual care. As they gathered for the meal, Tori was struck by the strange domesticity of the scene. Her son, her mother-in-law, and the wounded bounty hunter, who had upended their quiet existence. It felt almost like a family which was as disconcerting as it was comforting. "Will Miss Caroline be coming back tomorrow?" Benjamin asked, dipping bread into his stew. "Yes," Tori answered carefully. "She has business in town, but she'll visit again." "Is she Mr. Hayes's sister?" "They both have blue eyes." Hayes choked slightly on his water. "No, Ben, we're not related." "But you knew her husband." "I did." Hayes's expression softened. "He was my brother." Benjamin considered this, his young face serious. "Was he a bounty hunter too?" "No." Hayes exchanged a glance with Tori, silently, asking how much the boy should be told. At her slight nod, he continued. "He worked for the law in his way, helping catch bad men, like Papa did." The simple statement hung in the air, laden with meaning. Tori's throat tightened as she realized Benjamin had always known somehow that his father wasn't what the town claimed. "Yes," Hayes agreed quietly. "Like your father did." Benjamin nodded, satisfied, and returned to his meal. The adults ate in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After dinner, as Benjamin prepared for bed, Hayes stepped onto the front porch, needing a moment alone to process the day's revelations. Tori found him there some minutes later, staring out at the star-filled sky. "He's asking for you," she said. "Wants to say good night." Hayes looked surprised. "Me? He's taken quite a shine to you." Tori wrapped her shawl tighter against the cold. "It's been a while since he had a man to look up to." "I'm not," Hayes began, then stopped himself. "I'll go see him." When he'd gone inside, Tori remained on the porch, breathing in the crisp night air. The sky above was vast and clear, stars glittering like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Caleb had loved nights like this, would often drag her outside just to marvel at the constellations. "Oh, Caleb," she thought, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. "If only you'd trusted me with the truth." But she understood why he hadn't. He'd been protecting her, protecting Benjamin, just as she would protect them now by seeing this through to the end. The door opened behind her, and Hayes stepped out, his expression oddly vulnerable. "He said his prayers for me," he said, his voice rough. "Asked God to help my shoulder heal." Tori smiled softly. "Benjamin has a good heart, like his mother." The simple statement, delivered without artifice, caught her off guard. Tori looked away, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm not sure about this plan," she admitted, changing the subject. "There are so many ways it could go wrong." "There are," Hayes agreed. "But sometimes the only way forward is through the fire." "Is that what you've been doing? Walking through fire since your brother died?" Hayes was silent for a long moment, his breath clouding in the cold air. "I've been looking for someone to blame," he said finally. "Someone to punish. I thought it would ease the guilt." "Guilt?" "I wasn't there when Joseph needed me." The admission seemed torn from him. "We'd argued. I told him he was a fool for getting involved with Hollister. Said he'd made his bed, he could lie in it." Hayes stared out at the darkness. "Those were the last words I ever said to him." Tori understood that particular pain all too well. "The last thing I said to Caleb was to be careful. Not that I loved him, not anything meaningful. Just be careful." She shook her head, as if that would protect him. "We never know which goodbye will be the last." "No," Tori agreed softly. "We don't." They stood in silence, the shared understanding more comforting than words. The cold eventually drove them back inside, but something had shifted between them, a tentative trust, born of common grief and purpose. That night, as Tori lay in bed staring at the familiar patterns of light and shadow on her ceiling, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding. Owen Hayes had become more than just a wounded stranger, or a means to clear Caleb's name. He'd become someone she cared about, someone whose pain she felt as keenly as her own. The realization was terrifying. Morning brought renewed purpose and a flurry of activity. Tori dressed with unusual care, selecting her best dress 3 years out of fashion, but still presentable for her visit to town. The story they were crafting required her to appear serious about relocating, and appearance mattered in Clearwater. Hayes watched from the kitchen table as she pinned her hair, his expression unreadable. "Remember, don't be too obvious," he advised. "Just plant the seed. Let Caroline's comments at the hotel do most of the work." "I know how to be subtle, Mr. Hayes." Tori secured the final pin with more force than necessary. "I've been managing this town's gossip for 2 years." "Of course." He had the grace to look contrite. "I'm just worried," she finished for him. "I know. But this was your plan, remember?" "Our plan," he corrected. "And plans have a way of going sideways." Iris entered the kitchen, already dressed for town. "The wagon's ready," she announced. "Benjamin's bringing it around." "You're sure you want to come?" Tori asked, concerned. "Your arthritis is no worse than usual." Iris's tone brooked no argument. "Besides, it would look suspicious if I stayed behind. We always go to town together on delivery days." She was right, of course. Twice monthly they delivered eggs and butter to Hank's store, using the opportunity to purchase necessary supplies. Deviating from that routine now would only draw unwanted attention. "Just be careful," Hayes said, standing as Tori gathered her coat. Don't take any unnecessary risks. If something feels wrong, we'll come straight home, Tori promised. This is just reconnaissance, remember? Hayes nodded, though worry still creased his brow. I'll have everything ready here for tomorrow. The ride to town was tense, despite the bright winter sunshine. Benjamin sat between Tori and Iris on the wagon seat, happily oblivious to the adults' anxiety chattering about the hawks circling overhead and the rabbit tracks they passed. Clearwater came into view after an hour's journey, a small but orderly collection of buildings straddling the stagecoach route. Main Street featured a hotel, general store, saloon, bank, and church, with various smaller businesses and homes scattered behind. It wasn't much, but it was the center of commerce for ranchers and farmers from miles around. Tori felt the familiar tightening in her chest as they approached. Since Caleb's death, trips to town had become exercises in endurance, withstanding the whispers, the sidelong glances, the deliberate snubs. Today would be no different, except for the purpose behind their visit. They stopped first at Hank's general store, as was their custom. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the warm interior, a welcome relief from the cold. Hank Peterson looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. At 70, with a full white beard and perpetually twinkling eyes, he resembled nothing so much as a frontier Santa Claus. "The Sullivan ladies," he greeted warmly, "and young Master Benjamin, of course. Right on time, as usual." "Hello, Hank," Tori smiled, setting her basket of eggs on the counter. 4 dozen eggs and 2 pounds of butter today. "Excellent. Mrs. Wilson was just asking if you'd be coming." Hank began carefully transferring the eggs to his storage container. "How are things at the farm?" "Managing," Tori replied, her gaze drifting deliberately to a display of land sale notices pinned to the wall. "Though I've been wondering lately if it's worth the struggle." Hank paused, his bushy eyebrows rising in surprise. "You thinking of selling?" "I'm considering options." Tori kept her voice casual, though she was intensely aware of other customers browsing nearby. Benjamin deserves more than constant toil for meager returns, and better neighbors. The last was said with just enough emphasis to draw attention. From the corner of her eye, Tori saw Mrs. Abernathy, the banker's sister-in-law, and town gossip lean closer. "Well now," Hank rubbed his beard thoughtfully, "I'd hate to see you folks leave, but I understand the sentiment." He lowered his voice. "This town hasn't been kind to you, Tori. Not since Caleb." "No," she agreed, genuine emotion lending credibility to her performance. "And 2 years is long enough to wait for people to see the truth." "Where would you go? Laramie, perhaps? Or Cheyenne?" Tori examined a bolt of blue calico, running her fingers over the fabric. "Somewhere bigger, with more opportunities for Benjamin. And fewer memories." Hank nodded sympathetically. "Land prices are good right now. You'd get a fair sum for your place, I reckon." "Would I?" Tori turned back to him, her expression deliberately hopeful. "Do you really think someone would pay well for it?" "Sure. Good water, decent soil, not too far from town." Hank leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, Lawrence Pikes had his eye on that section for years. Tried to buy it from Caleb once, as I recall." "Did he?" Tori feigned surprise. "I didn't know that." "Oh yes. Wanted to expand his holdings in that direction. Caleb wouldn't sell, though. Said family land should stay in the family." Tori's throat tightened at this unexpected glimpse of her husband. He was right, but circumstances change. "That they do," Hank agreed. He finished wrapping their purchases, then hesitated. "Tori, if you're serious about this, be careful who you deal with. Some folks in this town don't have your best interests at heart." The warning was genuine, and Tori felt a pang of guilt for not taking Hank into their confidence immediately. But the fewer people who knew the details of their plan, the safer it would be. "I appreciate your concern, Hank. I'll be careful." As they completed their transaction, the bell above the door jingled again. Tori turned to see Lawrence Pike entering his expensive coat and polished boots, marking him as distinctly out of place among the practical work clothes of the other customers. Pike's eyes widened slightly in surprise at seeing her before his banker's smile slipped into place. "Mrs. Sullivan, what a pleasant coincidence." "Mr. Pike." Tori nodded coolly, gathering her purchases. "I was just thinking about our conversation yesterday," Pike continued, moving closer. "Perhaps we could schedule a more formal meeting to discuss your financial options." "That won't be necessary." Tori met his gaze directly. "I've decided to explore other possibilities." "Oh." Interest flickered in Pike's pale eyes. "What sort of possibilities?" "A fresh start," Tori replied, deliberately vague. "Somewhere new." Understanding dawned on Pike's face, followed quickly by calculating assessment. "A significant undertaking, one that would require substantial capital, I imagine." "Yes." Tori allowed a hint of vulnerability to show. "More than I currently have available." "Perhaps I could be of assistance." Pike's voice took on the smooth, practiced tone he used for business negotiations. "If you're considering selling your property, I might be interested in making an offer." "Would you?" Tori feigned surprise. "I hadn't considered that." "Think about it." Pike smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure we could reach an arrangement beneficial to us both." "Perhaps." Tori gathered Benjamin and Iris with a glance. "I'll give it some thought." "Please do." Pike touched his hat in farewell. "My door is always open to you, Mrs. Sullivan." As they left the store, Tori felt Pike's gaze following them down the street. The first part of their plan had worked. The bait had been taken. Now, they just had to ensure the trap was properly set for tomorrow's meeting. "Did you see his face?" Iris murmured as they walked toward the church. He couldn't believe his luck. "Too eager," Tori agreed. "He didn't even try to hide his interest." "Will he really give us money for the farm, Mama?" Benjamin asked his guileless question, carrying more clearly than Tori would have liked. "Hush, sweetheart," she urged gently. "We're just talking about possibilities." Their next stop was the church, a simple, white-clapboard building with a modest steeple. Reverend Wallace, a kindly man in his 50s with a scholarly demeanor, was sweeping the steps as they approached. "Mrs. Sullivan," he greeted. "What a pleasant surprise. We don't often see you on days other than Sunday." "Good morning, Reverend." Tori smiled warmly. "I was hoping to have a word with you, if you have a moment." Of course, of course." He set aside his broom. "Please come inside. It's too cold for conversation on the doorstep." The church interior was simple, but well-maintained. The wooden pews gleaming with polished, modest stained-glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. Mrs. Wallace was arranging flowers at the altar and turned with a welcoming smile as they entered. Tori and Iris and Benjamin, too. Her genuine pleasure at seeing them was a balm after Pike's calculating interest. "What brings you to town midweek?" "Deliveries," Tori explained. "And a favor to ask of your husband." Reverend Wallace gestured for them to sit. "How can I help?" "I'm considering selling the farm." Tori began, watching his reaction carefully. "Moving somewhere with better prospects for Benjamin." Surprise flickered across the Reverend's kind face. "I see. That's a significant decision." "Yes, and I find myself in need of a neutral location to discuss the potential sale." Tori glanced around the church. I wondered if I might use the meeting room tomorrow evening for privacy and propriety. Understanding dawned in the Reverend's eyes. A woman conducting business alone with a man needed to consider appearances, especially in a town like Clearwater. Of course, he agreed readily. The church is always available to members of the congregation. May I ask who the potential buyer is? Mr. Pike has expressed interest. Mrs. Wallace exchanged a quick glance with her husband. Lawrence Pike is a prominent citizen, she said carefully. Yes, Tori leaned forward slightly, which is why I'd appreciate if you or the Reverend could be nearby during our discussion. Not present exactly, but within hearing distance. The request was unusual enough to raise questions, but not so strange as to provoke suspicion. After all, a widow negotiating with a powerful man might reasonably want witnesses. I understand completely, Reverend Wallace assured her. As it happens, I have accounts to review in my study, just off the meeting room. The door has a tendency to remain ajar. And I'll be arranging hymnals in the sanctuary, Mrs. Wallace added, right next to the other door. Gratitude washed over Tori. Without asking outright, the Wallaces had agreed to serve as the witnesses they needed. Thank you. That would be perfect. What time should we expect you? The Reverend asked. 7 o'clock, if that's not too late. Not at all. We'll ensure everything is ready. As they concluded their arrangements and prepared to leave, Mrs. Wallace pressed a small paper bag into Benjamin's hands. Peppermint drops, she whispered conspiratorially, to sweeten the journey home. Benjamin beamed his innocent joy, a stark contrast to the tension of their mission. Thank you, Mrs. Wallace. Outside, they encountered Caroline Reed dressed elegantly as before, apparently taking a morning constitutional along Main Street. They exchanged polite nods as strangers would, but Tori caught the slight tilt of Caroline's head, their signal that her part of the plan was proceeding as expected. Their final errand took them past the sheriff's office, where Thompson could be seen through the window boots propped on his desk, as he leafed through wanted posters. He glanced up as they passed, his gaze sharpening with interest, before he deliberately returned to his papers. He's watching, Iris murmured, not turning her head. Let him watch, Tori replied. We've done nothing suspicious. They completed their purchases quickly, flour coffee, a new shirt for Benjamin's rapidly growing frame, and loaded the wagon for the return journey. As they prepared to leave, Tori noticed Pike emerging from the bank. His conversation with Thompson too distant to overhear, but their body language speaking volumes. They're planning something, Iris observed, following Tori's gaze. So are we. Tori snapped the reins, urging their horse forward. And our trap will be ready when they spring theirs. The ride home was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. Benjamin dozed against Iris's shoulder, exhausted from the excitement of town. Tori's mind raced with contingency plans, with all the ways tomorrow's confrontation could unfold. Hayes was waiting anxiously when they arrived, his relief palpable as the wagon pulled into the yard. Everything went as planned, Tori reported as he helped her down. Pike took the bait, the Wallaces agreed to be nearby, and Caroline's part is underway. Good. Hayes glanced toward town as if expecting pursuit. No one followed you. No, but they were watching. Thompson from his office, Pike from the bank steps. They'll be making their own plans, Hayes warned, lifting a sleeping Benjamin from the wagon. We need to be ready. That afternoon was spent in careful preparation. Hayes cleaned and checked his revolver, which Tori had kept hidden since his arrival. Tori made copies of the ledger pages, ensuring the originals would be safe, regardless of what happened at the meeting. Iris packed a small bag with necessities in case they needed to leave quickly after the confrontation. Benjamin sensed the tension but didn't question it, content to help with small tasks, and practice his reading with the Bible stories Hayes patiently listened to. His innocent presence was a constant reminder of what was at stake: his future, his safety, his inheritance of truth rather than shame. As evening fell, Caroline returned bringing news from town that confirmed their suspicions. "Pike's been asking about me," she reported, warming her hands by the fire, "trying to determine my connection to the Hollister investigation." "And Thompson?" Hayes asked, "making arrangements to ride out to the Carson Ranch tomorrow evening." Caroline's smile was satisfied. "Apparently, there's been cattle rustling that requires his immediate attention." "You arranged that?" Torrey was impressed. A carefully placed suggestion to Carson's foreman, who has no love for the sheriff. Caroline shrugged modestly. Men are often remarkably easy to manipulate when their pride is involved. "So Thompson will be occupied." Hayes nodded. "That's one worry addressed." "Not entirely," Caroline cautioned. "He's leaving Deputy Hemmings in charge. We'll need to account for him as well." "I can handle Hemmings," Hayes said with quiet confidence. "He's not the threat Thompson is." As night deepened, they reviewed their plan one final time, addressing contingencies, establishing signals, confirming timing. It wasn't foolproof, no plan ever was, but it was their best chance at justice. Later, when Benjamin was asleep and Iris had retired, Torrey found herself alone with Hayes on the front porch again. The night was clear and cold, their breath visible in the silver moonlight. "Tomorrow will be dangerous," Hayes said quietly, breaking the companionable silence. "Pike won't come alone, and he won't surrender easily." "I know," Torrey pulled her shawl tighter. "But we've come too far to turn back now." Hayes turned to face her, his expression serious. "If anything happens to me, don't." Torrey shook her head firmly. "We'll all come through this. Victoria." His use of her full name caught her attention. "Please, I need to say this." She fell silent, waiting. "If anything happens," he continued, "take Benjamin and Iris and go. Don't wait, don't try to help me, just go. Caroline has arrangements in place, a contact in Cheyenne who can get you safely to the Pinkerton office." "I won't leave you behind," Torrey protested. "Not after everything." "Yes, you will." Hayes's voice was gentle but firm. "Because Benjamin needs his mother more than I need a rescuer." The truth of that statement silenced her objections. Benjamin was her priority, had to be her priority, no matter what feelings might be developing for Owen Hayes. "All right," she agreed reluctantly. "But nothing will happen. We'll expose Pike and Thompson, clear Caleb's name, and then—" She trailed off, uncertain how to finish that sentence. "And then," Hayes prompted softly. Torrey looked up at him, at the face that had become so familiar in such a short time. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought beyond tomorrow." "Neither have I." Hayes's gaze held hers. "Not for a long time. But lately I've started to wonder." He didn't complete the thought, but he didn't need to. The unspoken possibility hung between them, a future neither had dared contemplate, yet suddenly seemed within reach. "It's late," Torrey said, finally breaking the moment, before it could deepen into something she wasn't ready to confront. "We should rest. Tomorrow will require all our strength." Hayes nodded understanding, and a hint of regret in his eyes. "Good night, Torrey." "Good night, Owen," she replied, using his first name deliberately, a small acknowledgement of the connection between them. As she lay in bed that night, Torrey found herself torn between fear for what lay ahead and a strange, cautious hope for what might follow. For the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond grief and survival, a future with laughter, with companionship, with love. It was a dangerous indulgence, she knew. Tomorrow's confrontation might end all such possibilities, but as sleep finally claimed her, Tori held on to that fragile hope, letting it strengthen her resolve for the battle to come. Dawn broke with somber clarity, pale winter sunlight filtering through the frost-etched windows of the Sullivan farmhouse. Tori stood at the kitchen stove, coffee pot in hand, watching the steam rise in lazy spirals. Behind her, the quiet sounds of breakfast preparation filled the kitchen. Iris kneading dough for biscuits, Benjamin setting the table with careful precision. Everything felt oddly normal, deceptively peaceful, as if this were just another day. But the tension humming beneath the domestic routine belied that illusion. Today, they would confront the men who had destroyed their lives 2 years ago. Today, they would either find justice or lose everything in the attempt. "You're up early." Tori turned to find Hayes in the doorway, his hair damp from washing his face freshly shaved. The change was striking. The scruff that had shadowed his jaw since his arrival, now gone, revealing stronger features than she'd realized. He looked younger somehow and more vulnerable. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Too much to think about." He accepted the cup with a nod of thanks, their fingers brushing briefly. "Second thoughts?" "No." Tori was surprised to find it was true. Despite the danger ahead, she felt remarkably certain. Only about involving you and Benjamin." Hayes's gaze drifted to the boy who was carefully arranging forks with solemn concentration. "If anything happens—" "Nothing will happen," Iris interrupted firmly, sliding biscuits into the oven. "We have a good plan. We have truth on our side. And," she added with a pointed look at Hayes's holstered revolver, "we have adequate protection." Hayes didn't look convinced, but he nodded, accepting her determination if not sharing her optimism. Caroline joined them, shortly emerging from the small sewing room where she'd spent the night. Like Hayes, she'd taken extra care with her appearance, her auburn hair arranged in a sophisticated style that spoke of Eastern refinement. She wore her best traveling dress, a rich burgundy wool that complemented her fair complexion. "You look like you're attending a society tea, not a confrontation with murderers," Tori observed, passing her coffee. Caroline smiled thinly. "Appearance matters, especially today. Pike respects wealth and position. If I'm to be convincing as the mysterious widow with connections to the Pinkertons, I need to look the part." Breakfast was a quiet affair, each lost in their own thoughts. Benjamin, sensing the significance of the day without understanding its particulars, was unusually subdued. When he'd finished eating, he looked up at Hayes with serious eyes. "Are you leaving today, Mr. Hayes?" The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning the boy couldn't fully comprehend. Hayes set down his coffee cup, giving Benjamin his full attention. "Not yet," he answered carefully. "Your mother and I have some business in town first." "Because of the bad men?" Tori exchanged alarmed glances with Hayes. They'd been careful not to discuss the details of their plan in Benjamin's presence. "What bad men, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Benjamin shrugged with the matter-of-fact wisdom of children. "The ones who hurt Papa. And Mr. Hayes's brother, the ones you're going to catch." A lump formed in Tori's throat. She'd underestimated her son's perception, his ability to piece together fragments of adult conversations into something approaching the truth. "Yes," Hayes answered when Tori couldn't. "Because of them." Benjamin nodded, satisfied. "Good. Papa would want you to catch them." "Yes," Hayes agreed softly. "I believe he would." After breakfast, final preparations began in earnest. The ledger pages were carefully wrapped and placed in an inner pocket of Hayes's coat. Weapons were checked. Hayes's revolver, the rifle Tori would bring, a small Derringer Caroline produced from her handbag. Iris packed food and necessities in case they needed to flee quickly. "The stage to Cheyenne leaves at 9 tomorrow morning," Caroline reminded them, If things go badly, that's our contingency. My contact will meet us at the hotel there. It won't come to that, Tori said firmly, though she memorized the details nonetheless. As mid-morning approached, it was time for Caroline to depart. Her role was critical. She would return to town, first establish her presence at the hotel, and set in motion the distraction that would occupy Deputy Hemmings during their confrontation with Pike. "Remember," Hayes cautioned as Caroline mounted her horse, "if Thompson changes his plans, if anything seems wrong, send word with the Wallace boy. We'll abort the meeting." "I know my part," Caroline assured him. Her expression softened as she looked at them all, Hayes, Tori, Iris, and Benjamin standing on the porch like a family portrait. "Be careful. I'll see you this evening." As she rode away, Benjamin waved enthusiastically. "Goodbye, Miss Caroline. Come back soon." Tori placed a hand on her son's shoulder, watching until Caroline disappeared down the road. "Let's go inside, Ben. It's too cold to stand out here." The rest of the day passed with agonizing slowness. Hayes checked and rechecked his revolver, his restless energy evident in the way he paced from window to window. Tori busied herself with household tasks, finding comfort in their familiarity. Iris taught Benjamin a new card game, their laughter providing brief respite from the tension. By mid-afternoon, it was time for Tori and Hayes to discuss Benjamin's care during their absence. "You'll stay with Grandma Iris," Tori explained, kneeling to meet her son's eyes. "She'll read you stories, and you can help her with supper." "Can't I come to town too?" Benjamin pleaded. "I'll be good, I promise." "Not this time, sweetheart." Tori smoothed his unruly hair. "This is grown-up business. But I want to help catch the bad men." Hayes knelt beside Tori, his expression serious. "You are helping Ben. By staying here, you're keeping your grandmother company and protecting the farm. That's an important job." Benjamin considered this, his young face thoughtful. "Like standing guard." "Exactly like that," Hayes agreed. "Someone needs to watch over things here, and you're the man for the job." The boy's chest puffed with pride at the responsibility. "I can do that." "I know you can." Hayes hesitated, then reached into his pocket, extracting a small wooden carving of a horse. "I made this for you. For luck." Benjamin accepted the gift with reverent hands, turning it to admire the careful details, flowing mane, delicate legs, the suggestion of muscles beneath a smooth wooden coat. "It's beautiful," he breathed, "like maple but better." "It's not as good as a real horse," Hayes said, but his words were cut off as Benjamin launched himself forward, small arms wrapping tightly around Hayes's neck. "Thank you," the boy whispered. "I'll keep it forever." Something shifted in Hayes's expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed to show. His arms came around the child, returning the embrace with careful tenderness. Tori looked away. Her vision suddenly blurred, the moment too intimate, too painful in its beauty. In another life, in a kinder world, such scenes might be commonplace, rather than precious anomalies. When it was time to leave, the goodbyes were brief but heartfelt. Iris hugged Tori tightly, her usual stoicism cracking to reveal the fear beneath. "Be careful," she whispered. "That boy needs his mother." "I will," Tori promised. "We'll be back before you know it." Benjamin held himself brave, only a slight trembling of his lower lip betraying his anxiety. He clutched the wooden horse in one hand, the other raised in a solemn wave as Tori and Hayes mounted their horses. "Remember," Hayes said as they rode away, "you're the guardian of the farm now." "Yes, sir." Benjamin called, his voice strong despite his worry. "I'll protect Grandma Iris." They rode in silence for the first mile, each lost in their own thoughts. The day was clear and cold. their breath forming clouds that dissipated in the winter air. The beauty of the snow-covered landscape seemed incongruous with the danger they were riding toward. "He's a good boy," Hayes said, finally breaking the silence. "Strong like his mother." "And gentle like his father," Tori added softly. Hayes glanced at her. "Caleb was gentle. When it mattered, with Benjamin with me." Tori smiled at the memory. "He could be fierce when protecting what he loved, but his natural instinct was kindness. You must miss him very much, every day." Tori met Hayes's gaze steadily. "But the pain changes over time, becomes something you can carry without breaking." Hayes nodded in understanding. "Joseph and I weren't close at the end, but his death left a hole all the same. A conversation that can never be finished. Questions that will never be answered." "That's the hardest part," Tori agreed. "The unfinished business. Maybe today we finish some of it." Hayes's expression hardened with resolve. "For Joseph, for Caleb, for Benjamin," Tori added, "so he can grow up knowing the truth about his father." The rest of the journey passed in companionable silence, broken only by occasional strategy discussions. As they approached town, Hayes pulled his hat lower, obscuring his features. They'd agreed he would remain inconspicuous until the meeting itself, minimizing the chance of Pike or his allies spotting him. Clearwater was quieter than usual as they rode in the winter afternoon, already fading toward dusk. A few shopkeepers were closing up for the day, nodding politely as Tori passed. If anyone thought it strange for her to be in town twice in as many days, they didn't comment. They stabled their horses behind the church as arranged with Reverend Wallace. The small building was silent, its windows glowing with warm lamplight against the gathering darkness. "Ready?" Hayes asked, helping Tori down from her mare. She straightened her skirts, drawing a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside, they found Mrs. Wallace arranging hymnals in the sanctuary, her greeting warm but subdued. "Lawrence Pike arrived about 10 minutes ago," she reported in a hushed voice. "He's waiting in the meeting room, alone as far as we can tell, though a man I didn't recognize was watching from across the street." "Probably one of his hired men," Hayes surmised. "He wouldn't come completely unguarded." "Reverend Wallace is in his study," Mrs. Wallace continued. "The connecting door is ajar as promised." "And Caroline?" Tori asked. "She stopped by earlier, confirmed everything was in place. Said to tell you Deputy Hemmings is occupied with a disturbance at the saloon, something about a card game gone wrong." Mrs. Wallace's eyes twinkled briefly. Remarkable how often such things happen when spirits flow freely. "Indeed," Hayes agreed, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "We're grateful for your help, Mrs. Wallace. I know this puts you and the Reverend in an awkward position." "Not at all." Her expression grew serious. "This town has treated the Sullivans shamefully these past 2 years. If we can help set things right, it's our Christian duty to do so." With a final nod of encouragement, Mrs. Wallace retreated to her position near the sanctuary door, close enough to hear what transpired in the meeting room, but not obviously eavesdropping. Hayes turned to Tori, his blue eyes intent. "Remember, let me stay hidden until Pike has incriminated himself. We need him to admit his guilt, not just negotiate for the ledger." "I know." Tori squeezed his hand briefly. "Be careful." "You too." Hayes slipped into the shadows of an alcove, near the meeting room, positioned to hear and intervene, but out of immediate sight. Taking a steadying breath, Tori adjusted her shawl, straightened her spine, and pushed open the door to the meeting room. Lawrence Pike stood by the window, his expensive coat hanging open to reveal a silk waistcoat. He turned at her entrance, his practiced banker's smile sliding into place. "Mrs. Sullivan, thank you for agreeing to meet." "Mr. Pike?" Tori nodded coolly, remaining near the door. I'm here to discuss your interest in my property. Indeed. Pike gestured to the table where he'd laid out several documents. Please sit. I've taken the liberty of preparing some preliminary paperwork. Tori moved to the table but didn't sit. You seem very eager, Mr. Pike. One might almost think you'd been waiting for this opportunity. A flash of something irritation wariness crossed Pike's face, for smoothing into affable confidence. Well, as you know, your farm occupies a strategic location. The water rights alone make it valuable. How valuable exactly? Tori ran her fingertips along the edge of the papers without looking at them. What are you prepared to offer? Pike named a sum that, while not overly generous, was fair by market standards. Under other circumstances, Tori might have been tempted by such an offer. That seems reasonable, she allowed, watching him carefully. But I find myself in need of something more substantial. A new beginning requires significant capital. Wariness crept into Pike's expression. The offer is more than fair, Mrs. Sullivan. Perhaps, but it doesn't account for certain additional considerations. Tori met his gaze directly. Information, for instance, that might be worth a great deal to the right person. Understanding dawned in Pike's eyes, followed quickly by calculation. Information, he repeated carefully. What sort of information would a farmer's widow possess that could be of value? The kind that's been hidden in my barn for 2 years. Tori reached into her coat pocket, extracting a single folded page, one of the copies they'd made of Caleb's evidence. The kind that concerns missing funds, falsified records, and connections to a certain gang that operated in these parts. Pike's face blanched as she slid the page across the table. He picked it up with fingers that trembled slightly, scanning its contents. When he looked up, his affable mask had vanished, replaced by cold fury. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice low. "Where do you think?" Tori raised an eyebrow. "My husband was thorough in his investigations and cautious enough to leave insurance behind." Pike's knuckles whitened around the paper. Sullivan had no proof, nothing that would stand up to scrutiny. You seem very certain about what my husband did or didn't have. Tori's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. Curious, given that you always claimed to know nothing about his activities. Pike caught himself visibly regrouping. What is it you want, Mrs. Sullivan? What I've always wanted. The truth about my husband's death, and the means to start fresh elsewhere. Tori leaned forward slightly. $20,000, cash, for the farm and for all the evidence Caleb collected. Pike barked a harsh laugh. 20,000, you're delusional. Am I? I wonder what the territorial governor would pay for proof of corruption in one of his appointed towns, or the newspapers in Cheyenne. Tori shrugged. Perhaps I should find out. Fear flickered across Pike's face. You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Sullivan. No, Mr. Pike. I'm ending one. Tori straightened. $20,000, and I disappear with my son, never to be heard from again, or you can take your chances with the authorities. Pike studied her for a long moment, assessing her resolve. Whatever he saw in her face must have convinced him of her seriousness. I don't have that kind of cash immediately available, he said finally. You have until tomorrow morning, Tori countered. When the stage leaves for Cheyenne. Pike's eyes narrowed. And if I refuse, then everything my husband collected goes to the territorial marshal. Every ledger page, every note about your meetings with the Hollister gang, every detail about Sheriff Thompson's involvement. You're bluffing, Pike hissed. If you had that kind of evidence, you'd have used it long ago. Would I? Tori tilted her head. With Sheriff Thompson controlling the law in Clearwater, With your influence over the town, who would have believed me? She shook her head. No, it was safer to wait. But circumstances have changed. I have new allies now. The woman at the hotel, Pike guessed, Reed's widow, and the bounty hunter. Torrey neither confirmed nor denied his assumption. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Pike, $20,000 for my silence, and all the evidence? Pike was silent, his mind visibly racing behind his pale eyes. I'll need to see all the evidence first, he said finally. Verify it's what you claim. Of course. Torrey had anticipated this demand. I have samples with me. The originals are secure to be handed over upon payment. She reached into her pocket again, extracting the remaining copies they'd prepared. As Pike accepted them, his expression darkened with recognition. These are from my private ledger, he muttered. How did Sullivan access these? It was the admission they'd been waiting for acknowledgement, that the records were genuine, that they came from Pike's own books. Torrey felt a surge of satisfaction knowing Hayes had heard every word. Caleb was resourceful, she replied simply, and determined to expose the corruption in Clearwater. Fool, Pike spat. He could have joined us, profited alongside the rest. Instead, he chose to play hero. His mask had fully slipped now, revealing the ruthless man beneath. Do you know how he died, Mrs. Sullivan? Begging for his life, pleading for mercy. White-hot anger flashed through Torrey, but she controlled it, channeling it into her performance. So you were there when my husband was murdered. Thompson pulled the trigger, Pike said dismissively. But yes, I was there. Someone had to ensure the job was done properly. It was the final piece they needed: direct confession to involvement in Caleb's death. Torrey took a steadying breath, preparing for Hayes's entrance. But before she could signal him, the meeting room door burst open. Sheriff Thompson stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous, revolver drawn. You stupid woman, he growled, advancing into the room. Did you really think I'd ride all the way to the Carson Ranch on a wild goose chase? Torrey's blood ran cold. Thompson was supposed to be miles away by now, diverted by Caroline's carefully planted rumors of cattle rustling. His presence changed everything. Sheriff, Pike greeted, relief evident in his voice. Excellent timing. Mrs. Sullivan here seems to think she can blackmail us with some papers her husband stole. Thompson's cold eyes fixed on Torrey. Is that so? Blackmail's a serious crime, Mrs. Sullivan. So is falsifying evidence. Nothing's been falsified, Torrey countered, fighting to maintain her composure. Just as nothing was stolen. These are copies of Pike's actual records that prove your involvement in the Hollister gang's operations. Dangerous accusations, Thompson said softly, raising his revolver to point at her heart. The kind that could get a woman killed, especially a woman with a history of instability grieving her criminal husband's death. Understanding washed over Torrey like ice water. This had been their plan all along, not just to silence her, but to eliminate her permanently. Perhaps make it look like suicide, the tragic end to a widow's descent into madness and false accusations. You won't get away with this, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. People know I'm here. They'll ask questions. A tragic misunderstanding, Pike supplied smoothly. You became distraught during our meeting, made wild accusations. The sheriff tried to calm you, but in your agitated state, you drew a weapon. Thompson nodded, producing a small derringer from his pocket, identical to the one Caroline carried. This will be found in your hand. Such a sad end to a troubled life. They had planned this meticulously, Torrey realized. Perhaps they'd known about their trap all along. But where was Hayes? Why hadn't he intervened? Her answer came in the form of a commotion from the church sanctuary. The sounds of struggle, a woman's cry cut short. Mrs. Wallace Torrey realized with horror. She must have been discovered by one of Pike's men. "Ah," Pike smiled coldly. "It seems our other guest has arrived." The door opened again, admitting a burly man Torrey recognized as one of Thompson's occasional deputies. He shoved Caroline Reed before him, her elegant appearance now disheveled, a bruise forming on her cheek. "Found her sneaking around back, Sheriff," the man reported. "Got this off her." He held up Caroline's small derringer, the mate to the one Thompson now planned to plant on Torrey. "Mrs. Reed," Pike offered a mocking bow. "How kind of you to join us. Now we're only missing one member of your little conspiracy." "If you mean Hayes, he's likely miles away by now," Caroline said coolly, despite her obvious fear. "Smart enough to recognize a trap when he sees one." Torrey fought to keep her expression neutral. If Hayes had escaped, there was still hope. He could bring help expose what had happened here. Thompson seemed less convinced. "Search the church," he ordered his deputy. "Hayes is here somewhere. No man leaves his woman to face danger alone." "I'm not his woman," Torrey objected automatically. Pike laughed. "Perhaps not officially. But we've had eyes on your farm, Mrs. Sullivan. We know Hayes has been staying with you, know about your cozy little domestic arrangement." The implication made Torrey's cheeks burn, but she recognized the attempt to provoke her. "My personal life is none of your concern, Mr. Pike." "On the contrary," Pike countered, "everything in Clearwater is my concern, including who beds whom." Caroline made a small, disgusted sound. "You're a small man, Lawrence Pike, playing king in a town barely worthy of the name." "Perhaps," Pike acknowledged without offense. "But I'll be alive tomorrow, which is more than I can say for either of you ladies." Thompson shifted impatiently. "Enough talk. We need to finish this before someone comes looking for the good Reverend and his wife." "What have you done to them?" Torrey demanded, fear for the kindly couple overshadowing her own danger. "Nothing permanent," Thompson assured her with a cold smile. "Just ensuring they won't interrupt our little drama." The deputy returned his expression frustrated. "No sign of Hayes, Sheriff. Checked every room, every closet." "He's here," Thompson insisted. "I can feel it." "It doesn't matter," Pike interjected. "We have what we need. The women, the evidence. We can deal with Hayes when he shows himself." He turned to Torrey. "Now, Mrs. Sullivan, where are the original documents?" "Safe," Torrey replied defiantly. "Where you'll never find them." Pike sighed as if disappointed by her stubbornness. "I was afraid you'd say that." He nodded to Thompson. "Perhaps Mrs. Reed will be more cooperative if properly motivated." Understanding his intention, Thompson grabbed Caroline roughly, pressing his revolver to her temple. "Where are the originals, Mrs. Sullivan? Answer quickly, or your friend dies first." Torrey's mind raced. The originals were hidden back at the farm entrusted to Iris's care. Revealing their location would endanger not only the evidence, but Iris and Benjamin as well. "Don't tell them anything, Torrey," Caroline urged, her voice steady, despite the gun at her head. "They'll kill us regardless." "Brave words," Thompson mocked. "Let's see if they hold when I start breaking fingers." He holstered his revolver, drawing a knife instead. Caroline paled, but maintained her defiant expression as he seized her hand, pressing the blade against her slender index finger. "Last chance, Mrs. Sullivan," Pike warned. "The documents, or your friend suffers." Torrey's resolve wavered. She couldn't let Caroline be tortured, but revealing the location of the evidence would doom them all. "There," she began. "Behind you," a familiar voice interrupted. Pike whirled to find Hayes standing in the doorway to the Reverend's study revolver aimed steadily at Thompson's head. "Let her go," Hayes ordered, his voice deadly calm. "Now." Relief flooded Tory. Hayes hadn't abandoned them. He'd simply found another entrance, likely circling around, when he realized their plan had been compromised. Thompson's shock quickly gave way to calculation. He still held Caroline, his knife now pressed to her throat. "Lower your weapon, Hayes, or she dies." "You'll kill her anyway," Hayes replied evenly. "Just as you killed my brother. And Caleb Sullivan." "Your brother was a fool," Thompson spat, thinking he could play both sides. He deserved what he got. "So you admit to killing Joseph Reed?" Hayes pressed. "I put a bullet in him myself," Thompson confirmed with grim satisfaction. "Just like I did Sullivan. Just like I'll do to you once you drop that gun." The deputy had drawn his own weapon now, creating a deadly standoff. Hayes couldn't shoot Thompson without endangering Caroline, and he couldn't target the deputy and Pike simultaneously. Tory edged slowly toward the table where Pike had left the copied ledger pages. If she could secure those, at least some evidence would survive whatever happened next. "I see you, Mrs. Sullivan," Pike warned, his own revolver appearing from beneath his coat. "Don't move." The room fell silent, the tension palpable as each calculated their next move. Tory caught Hayes's. Hayes's eye saw the silent apology there. He had no clear shot, no way to save them all. The impasse was broken by a sound no one expected, a child's voice, high and clear, calling from the sanctuary. "Mama? Are you in there? Benjamin?" Tory's heart stopped. All eyes turned toward the sanctuary door. In that split second of distraction, Hayes fired. The bullet caught Thompson in the shoulder of his gun arm, causing him to release Caroline with a howl of pain. She ducked away as Hayes swung his weapon toward the deputy, who fired wildly in response. Chaos erupted. Pike dove for cover behind the table. Caroline scrambled toward Tory. The deputy's second shot went wide, splintering the wooden doorframe near Hayes's head. "Benjamin!" Tory screamed, lunging for the sanctuary door. "Run! Get out!" But it was too late. The sanctuary door burst open, revealing Benjamin, and behind him Iris, holding the Sullivan family rifle with grim determination. "Nobody move!" Iris commanded, her weathered hands steady on the weapon. "Or I'll put a bullet in you." The deputy froze, clearly recognizing that Iris Sullivan was not bluffing. Thompson, clutching his bleeding shoulder, glared with impotent fury. "Benjamin, come here!" Tory ordered, her voice shaking with fear and relief. The boy ran to her, and she pushed him behind her, shielding him with her body. "How touching!" Pike sneered from his position behind the table. The whole family reunited for the final act. "Drop your weapon, Pike," Hayes demanded, his revolver trained on the banker. "It's over. We have witnesses, confessions, evidence. There's no way out." "There's always a way out." Pike countered, his expression turning calculating. "A deal, perhaps. The originals for our lives. You get your justice, clear Sullivan's name. We disappear, never to return to Wyoming territory." "After what you've done," Hayes's voice was incredulous. "The men you've killed, the lives you've destroyed. It's a better offer than you deserve," Caroline added coldly. Pike's face hardened. Then perhaps a different incentive. With surprising speed, he aimed his revolver not at Hayes or Tory, but at Benjamin. "No!" Tory moved to shield her son more completely, but Pike's finger was already tightening on the trigger. 3 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Hayes's bullet struck Pike's upper chest, sending him staggering backward. Iris's rifle shot caught him in the side, spinning him further. But it was the 3rd shot from Thompson's backup revolver, pulled from his boot, while everyone focused on Pike, that proved most devastating. The sheriff had aimed for Hayes, but as he fired, Caroline threw herself forward, knocking Hayes aside. The bullet meant for Hayes struck Caroline instead. She crumpled to the floor, blood blossoming across the burgundy fabric of her dress. Hayes dropped to his knees beside her, pressing his hand desperately against the wound. "No, no, no," he murmured. "Caroline, stay with me." Pike lay motionless by the overturned table. Thompson, wounded but still dangerous, raised his small revolver for another shot. Before he could fire, Reverend Wallace appeared in the doorway behind him, swinging a heavy brass candlestick with surprising force. The blow connected with Thompson's head, dropping him unconscious to the floor. "I believe that's enough violence in the Lord's house," the Reverend said grimly, rubbing his wrists where ropes had recently bound them. "Caroline," Hayes called urgently, cradling her head, "open your eyes, look at me." Her eyelids fluttered. "Did you get them?" she whispered. "We got them." Hayes confirmed, his voice thick. "Thanks to you. Now lie still. We'll get help." "Too late for that," Caroline murmured, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of her mouth. "Joseph always said I had terrible timing." Tori knelt beside them, one arm still around Benjamin, who watched with wide, frightened eyes. "You saved Hayes's life," she told Caroline softly. "You're a hero." A faint smile touched Caroline's lips. "Tell the Pinkertons, case closed." Her gaze shifted to Hayes, a lifetime of regret in her dimming eyes. "I'm sorry. We never really knew each other. Joseph loved you so much." Hayes swallowed hard. "I loved him too. I should have told him." "He knew." Caroline's voice was fading. "In the end, he knew." Her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and labored. Hayes looked to Tori in desperate appeal, but she could only shake her head helplessly. The bullet had struck too close to Caroline's heart. No doctor could save her now. "Benjamin," Tori said gently, "go with Grandma Iris and Reverend Wallace. Wait in the sanctuary." The boy hesitated, his gaze fixed on the wounded woman. "Is Miss Caroline going to heaven like Papa?" Tears stung Tori's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. Go now. Please." Reluctantly, Benjamin allowed Iris to lead him away, his small face solemn with the weight of what he'd witnessed. Reverend Wallace followed after securing Thompson with the same ropes that had recently bound him and his wife. Left alone with Hayes and the dying woman, Tori moved to Caroline's other side, taking her cold hand. "Stay with her," she murmured to Hayes. "I'll check on Pike." The banker lay where he'd fallen, his expensive waistcoat stained dark with blood. Tori knelt cautiously beside him, ready to defend herself if necessary. But Lawrence Pike would threaten no one ever again. His eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, his expression frozen in permanent surprise. Returning to Hayes and Caroline, Tori found him hunched over the still form, his shoulders shaking with silent grief. Caroline Reed had slipped away, taking with her the last living connection to Joseph, to the brother Hayes had never properly reconciled with. Tori placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Owen." He didn't respond for a long moment, his breathing ragged. When he finally looked up, his blue eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "She deserved better," he said hoarsely. "They all did. Joseph, Caleb, Frank Hollister, all of them caught in Pike's web." "Yes," Tori agreed softly. "But thanks to Caroline, thanks to all of us, Pike's web is finally broken." Hayes covered her hand with his own. "At what cost?" Before Tori could answer, the meeting room door burst open again. Deputy Hemmings stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. as he took in the scene. Pike dead on the floor, Thompson unconscious and bound Caroline's still form cradled between Torrey and Hayes. "What in God's name happened here?" he demanded, hand moving to his holster. "Justice," Reverend Wallace answered, appearing behind the deputy. "These men murdered Caleb Sullivan 2 years ago, deputy, and others. They've confessed to their crimes." Hemmings looked dubious, but the arrival of Hank Peterson and several other townspeople crowding behind him lent weight to the Reverend's words. "It's true," Mrs. Wallace confirmed, joining her husband. We heard everything. Sheriff Thompson admitted to killing Caleb Sullivan and Joseph Reed, and Pike confessed to being part of it. They tried to kill Mrs. Sullivan and Mrs. Reed as well," the Reverend added. "Would have succeeded if Mr. Hayes hadn't intervened." Hemmings looked overwhelmed, clearly unprepared for this level of crisis. I need to send for the marshal in Cheyenne." "Yes," Hank agreed firmly. "And in the meantime, I suggest you lock what's left of your boss in his own jail, Henry." The old shopkeeper's normally jovial face was hard with anger. "Unless you were part of their scheme too." "No," Hemmings protested, genuine shock in his expression. "I knew nothing about this. Nothing." "Then prove it," Hank challenged. "Do your duty. Arrest Thompson, secure the scene, and send that telegram." As the deputy moved uncertainly to obey, helped by several determined townsmen, Torrey turned back to Hayes. He was carefully arranging Caroline's body, closing her eyes, folding her hands across her chest with gentle dignity. "We should move her somewhere more peaceful," Torrey suggested softly. "The sanctuary, perhaps." Hayes nodded, gathering Caroline's slight form in his arms. Together, they carried her into the church proper, laying her in a front pew. Someone had lit the altar candles, their warm glow casting soft shadows across the quiet space. Benjamin and Iris waited there, the boy's small face solemn, as Hayes arranged a clean altar cloth over Caroline's body. When he'd finished, Benjamin approached, clutching the wooden horse Hayes had carved for him. "Is it okay if I put this with her?" he asked hesitantly. "So she won't be lonely on her way to heaven." Hayes knelt to Benjamin's level, his expression softening. "That's your special horse. Are you sure you want to give it away?" Benjamin nodded seriously. "You can make me another one, but Miss Caroline doesn't have anybody to make her things anymore." Hayes's composure nearly broke at the simple wisdom in the child's words. "I think that's a fine idea, Ben. She'd be honored." With reverent care, Benjamin placed the wooden horse beside Caroline's covered form. "Safe journey, Miss Caroline," he whispered. Torrey drew her son close, her heart swelling with pride and sorrow in equal measure. Even amidst tragedy, Benjamin's inherent goodness shone through Caleb's legacy, living on in their child. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Thompson was indeed locked in his own jail, his wound treated by the town doctor. Telegrams were sent to Cheyenne, summoning territorial authorities. Statements were taken from all witnesses, the evidence carefully documented and secured. Through it all, Torrey remained close to Hayes, offering silent support as he dealt with the aftermath of Caroline's sacrifice. When all immediate matters had been addressed, Reverend Wallace offered them rooms in the church parsonage for the night. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it's clean and warm, and I expect none of you wish to return home in the dark after what you've been through." Torrey accepted gratefully. The thought of the long ride back to the farm, explaining everything to Benjamin along the way, was more than she could face tonight. The parsonage was modest, but comfortable, its simple furnishings reflecting the Wallaces' practical nature. Mrs. Wallace provided a light meal, which Benjamin ate with surprising appetite, before falling asleep. Almost immediately, exhaustion overcoming the excitement of the day. Iris, too, retired early, the strain of the confrontation evident in the new lines on her weathered face. But she paused at the door to the small room she would share with Benjamin, looking back at Tori and Hayes with quiet certainty. "Caleb would be proud," she said simply. "Of all of us." When she'd gone, Tori and Hayes found themselves alone in the parsonage's small sitting room, a fire crackling in the hearth, casting warm light across the faded furniture. Neither spoke for a long time, the events of the day too overwhelming for easy conversation. Finally, Hayes broke the silence. "I should have anticipated Thompson would see through our plan. Should have been better prepared." "You couldn't have known," Tori countered gently. "None of us could." "Caroline died because of my failure." "Caroline died a hero," Tori corrected, saving a man she respected, ensuring justice for her husband. "Don't diminish her choice by claiming it as your failure." Hayes looked up, surprise evident in his expression. Then slowly he nodded. "You're right. She made her choice, as Joseph did, as Caleb did." "As we all must," Tori agreed softly. Another silence fell, more comfortable this time. The fire popped and hissed, sending occasional sparks up the chimney. Outside, the winter night was still, the town quiet, under its blanket of snow. "What will you do now?" Tori asked eventually. "With Pike and Thompson exposed, your hunt is over." Hayes considered the question. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been chasing vengeance for so long I never thought about what would come after." "Will you return to bounty hunting?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I think I'm done with that life. Too much violence, too much loneliness." His gaze met hers, uncertainty and hope mingling in his blue eyes. "What about you? Will you stay in Clearwater now that Caleb's name is cleared?" Tori hadn't considered her own future either, too focused on surviving the present. "I don't know. The farm is our home, but there are many memories there. Not all of them good." "Benjamin deserves a place where he can grow up free from shadows," Hayes observed. "Yes, but he also deserves stability roots." Tori sighed. "It's not a simple decision. Few important ones are." They lapsed into silence again, each contemplating paths not yet chosen. The fire burned lower, the room growing dimmer as the night deepened. "I should check on Benjamin," Tori said, finally rising from her chair. Hayes stood as well, suddenly looking uncertain. "Tori, he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. She waited, heart beating a little faster at the intensity in his gaze. "I came to your farm looking for answers," he said at last. "Hunting ghosts and seeking vengeance. I never expected to find—" "What?" she prompted softly when he trailed off. "Hope," he finished simply. "A reason to look forward instead of back." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within her, a place she'd thought frozen since Caleb's death, now warming back to life. "Owen," she began, not entirely sure what she meant to say. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I know it's too soon. I know there's Benjamin to consider, and your grief, and 1,000 other complications. But I need you to know that if there's a place for me in your future, whatever that future holds, wherever it takes you, I would be honored to share it." Tori looked up into his face, seeing past the hard edges forged by loss and vengeance to the good man beneath. The man who had carved a wooden horse for her son, who had faced killers to clear her husband's name, who stood before her now offering not demands or expectations, but simply himself. "There is a place," she said quietly, with growing certainty. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but there is a place for you, Owen, if you want it. His smile transformed his face, softening the lines of worry and grief. I want it, very much. In the quiet of the parsonage sitting room, with the fire burning low, and the world hushed with snow outside, Tori Sullivan took a step toward her future. It wasn't a grand declaration or a passionate embrace, simply her hand reaching up to touch Hayes's cheek, a gesture of connection and promise. Then we'll find our way, she said. Together. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the softened earth. The Sullivan farm, bathed in April sunshine, looked renewed, the barn freshly painted, the garden newly planted, the house repaired and bright with open windows. On the porch, Benjamin sat beside Hayes, their heads bent together over a piece of wood, taking shape beneath Hayes's skilled knife. The boy watched intently occasionally, asking questions that Hayes answered with patient detail. Inside, Tori and Iris prepared Sunday dinner, the kitchen warm with baking bread and simmering stew. Through the window, Tori could see the two figures on the porch, their easy companionship bringing a smile to her face. "He's good for Benjamin," Iris observed, following her gaze. "And for you." "Yes," Tori agreed simply. There was no need to elaborate. The changes in their lives over the past months spoke for themselves. After the confrontation at the church, justice had moved with surprising swiftness. The territorial marshal, summoned by Hemmings's telegram, had arrived within days. Thompson now awaited trial in Cheyenne, his crimes too numerous to list on a single indictment. Pike's death had revealed the extent of his corruption. His bank ledgers, seized by the authorities, exposed a complex web of fraud, extortion, and money laundering that had ensnared half the prominent citizens of Clearwater. Many faced prison. Others had fled, leaving businesses abandoned and reputations in tatters. For the Sullivan family, the aftermath had brought vindication. Caleb's name was officially cleared, his role as an informant finally acknowledged. The town that had shunned them now offered awkward apologies and belated acceptance. But the most significant changes had been personal, not public. Hayes had stayed initially to help with the farm, while Tori and Iris dealt with the legal aftermath of Pike's exposure. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Benjamin had attached himself to Hayes with a child's wholehearted devotion, and gradually, carefully, Tori had allowed her own feelings to emerge from the protective shell of grief. They moved slowly, with respect for the past and caution toward the future. Hayes took a small cabin on the property, insisting on propriety, even as he integrated himself into their daily lives. He taught Benjamin to fish and track, helped Iris with the heavy chores that had grown difficult for her aging hands, and worked alongside Tori to restore the farm to prosperity. And in quiet evenings, when Benjamin was asleep and Iris retired, they talked, sharing stories of their lives before building tentative bridges toward what might come after. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, content in each other's presence. "Dinner's nearly ready," Tori called through the open door. "Benjamin needs to wash up." "Yes, ma'am," Hayes responded with a smile in his voice. "We're just finishing up here." They came in together, Benjamin proudly clutching a small wooden bird, its details remarkably lifelike despite its simple form. "Look, Mama," he exclaimed, holding up his treasure. "Mr. Hayes showed me how to carve the wings so they look like they're moving. It's beautiful, sweetheart." Tori admired, genuinely impressed with the craftsmanship. "Did you do all this yourself?" "Mr. Hayes helped with the hard parts," Benjamin admitted honestly. "But I did the feathers." "Well done," Iris praised, setting plates on the table. "Now go wash those hands before you get wood shavings in my biscuits." As Benjamin scampered off, Hayes moved to help with the remaining dinner preparations, his presence in their kitchen now a familiar comfort rather than a novelty. "The Carson place is for sale," he mentioned, casually setting glasses beside each plate. "Old man Carson's moving to Denver to live with his daughter." "Is he?" Tori responded, equally casual. "It's good land. Someone will snap it up quickly." "Someone could," Hayes agreed. "Someone looking to expand, perhaps. Build a future." Their eyes met over the table, unspoken possibilities hovering between them. They'd discussed marriage in roundabout ways, neither pushing, but both acknowledging the direction they were heading. "A future sounds nice," Tori said softly. Hayes's smile was answer enough. After dinner, as the spring evening settled into gentle twilight, they walked together to the small rise behind the house. A simple wooden cross marked Caleb's grave, surrounded now by early wildflowers pushing through the grass. Tori knelt, placing a fresh bouquet beside the marker. They came here often, a family ritual that honored the past while embracing the present. Benjamin sometimes left small treasures, interesting rocks, a perfect pine cone, once a bird's abandoned eggshell. Today he'd added his carved wooden bird to the collection. "He'd be pleased," Hayes said quietly, as they stood together watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and pink. "To see Benjamin growing strong, to see you happy again." "I think he would," Tori agreed. She'd long since made peace with her guilt, understanding that loving Owen Hayes didn't diminish what she'd shared with Caleb. Different loves, both true in their own ways. "There's something I've been meaning to give you," Hayes said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He withdrew a small wooden box carved with delicate wildflowers. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a ring, silver set, with a small turquoise stone that caught the fading light. "It's not fancy," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "But I had it made in town from silver that came from these mountains. And the stone is the color of your eyes." Tori finished, her throat tight with emotion. "It's beautiful, Owen." "I'm not asking for an answer right now," he hastened to add. "I know we're still finding our way, but I wanted you to have it. To know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. For you. For Benjamin. For whatever life we might build together." Tori looked from the ring to Hayes's face, seeing in his eyes all the hope and uncertainty and love that mirrored her own feelings. The past 2 years had taught her the fragility of happiness, but also its resilience. Love wasn't a finite resource to be hoarded or a single chance to be lost. It was a wild thing that grew where it was nurtured, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Like wildflowers after a storm pushing through snow toward the sun. "I'm ready," she said, simply extending her hand. Hayes's smile was brighter than the setting sun as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. Behind them, Benjamin called from the porch, his young voice carrying clear across the evening air. "Mama, Mr. Hayes, Grandma says there's apple pie if you come now." They turned toward home, hand in hand, the past honored but no longer binding, the future open and waiting to be written. "Coming!" Tori called back, squeezing Hayes's hand. Together, they walked toward the house glowing with lamplight, toward family and warmth and new beginnings, toward tomorrow.